We're back,
Ooh,
suckers. Episode 5.
5. That is a big number.
It is. We've done the studio sequel. We've done the concept album. We could be heading into greatest hits territory at this point.
Yeah. And look, the ratings continue to impress the network
Oh,
executives.
they're through the roof.
They're through the roof. They've agreed to extend us for another season. I'm
The
really happy.
Nelson ratings are right up there. I did say Nelson, not Nielsen.
We're hitting that key demographic of males
Right.
aged 35 to
The, the,
50.
the important thing is, unlike Peter Frampton, we did not get disassembled. However, being episode 5, we're coming alive.
Yeah. 5 alive, baby.
I've been saving that since episode 1, for anyone that cares.
Praying that we'd make it to episode
Yeah,
5,
just in case we ever got to an episode 5, I thought Johnny 5. That's a terrible dad joke pun that one or two people might appreciate.
Yeah. You just wait, folks. Wait till we get to our short circuit stream. You're
Yeah,
going to really enjoy it.
yeah. There's a whole 2 movies. Didn't make it to a third like RoboCop.
Yeah. He was an inferior product, Johnny 5.
Yeah, he was. So what are we talking about tonight, Mark?
I believe, Johnny, tonight we're going to revisit a happy time in our lives and we're going to talk about
A
our
happy
favorite
time.
PlayStation 1 games, the original PlayStation.
Yeah, back when we just called it PlayStation, there was no sequels, 2, 3, whatever. Didn't have to call it PlayStation 1 retroactively, like Generation 1 and Generation 2. It was just fucking PlayStation.
That's right. We were there. We were living it.
Yep. My one, and
Oh,
I'll
what a
tell you,
time.
my grey one actually out the back, it still bloody works. It didn't. I've only ever owned one, and it still works to this day. My other mate, he went through 3 in like 2 years, so a lot of the early models are very dodgy. The lasers would burn out, but he was up all night playing it 12 hours a day most days of the week.
Yeah, my childhood one bit the dust a long time ago, and I usually now, if I'm playing original PlayStation games, I
Mm-hmm.
usually play them through my
Emulator.
PlayStation. I trade them through my PS2 because it's still in working order and it plays the
Yeah.
discs. So
Yeah. Oh, nice.
it's handy. It's handy for that.
I've had several PS2s that all crapped out, but my PS1 back from 97, I got mine. Still going. I don't know how.
You got one of the good ones.
Mm. Yeah,
Well,
as an anomaly.
mine was so heavily modded and tampered with, which I'm sure we'll get
I
to
was
later
modded
on.
day one.
Yeah, my
It's missing.
modifications probably ended up killing the console.
What mine's missing in the little CD spindle is, I think, 2, 3 little ball bearings, and there's little chunks of plastic. The little chunks of plastic all flew out years ago, but it still spins fine and works 100%.
As long as it can read the disc, that's all you need.
Yeah. I got to put on display at some point when I get on the shelf up. I've still got my Mega Drive from the 90s. It's not my original one, it's the second one I had, but it was only, I mean, it's still from 94, 95, and was my friend's one that lived around the corner. When he stopped playing, he gave it to me. Like Turtles and other shit. When he grew out of it, it's like, Johnny will have it. uh, but I've still got old Mega Drive, PlayStation. I sold off a lot of my other stuff, but those probably my 2 all-time favorite consoles, really, just the amount of hours I put into them. And
Yeah, I would be of a similar mindset. The Sega Mega Drive was like my first real love for consoles, and then
yeah,
the first
I
PlayStation
still
just
love
came
it.
about after. Yeah, oh, same here. It's Sega Mega Drive and Sony PlayStation. The first
Mhm.
PlayStation will probably
I
always be
got
my two favorite game consoles.
I flirted with the Super Nintendo for many years, and I played a lot of those fantastic games on there. But like, I grew up a Sega kid playing Altered Beast and Golden Axe in arcades. I love fast-paced action games. Wasn't really into Afterburner and Outrun, but the old arcades in New Zealand had the full sit-down cab Afterburner, had the actual like flight joystick thing. The Outrun had a full-size plastic, probably fiberglass car, I think it would be, on all the hydraulics. And so, you know, I really was a Sega kid, and I had Master System. I played Alex Kidd. I had Mega Drive. I played Streets of Rage 2 and 3 were my favorites. And Super Nintendo's awesome. I've got a Switch, and I play every Nintendo machine ever, from the original Game Boy up to the Switch and GameCube. But the Sega stuff was just my favorite. It was like the fast, twitchy action gamer. And if you like that kind of stuff, you might have moved on to PC, Doom, and Quake, like the fast, hardcore stuff.
Yeah. Oh, look, Johnny, you don't even need to pretend to like Nintendo because we both know that Sega
No
does what
friendo, so I
Nintendo
used to
don't.
call it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fuck Nintendo. We're Sega kids all the way.
No, I do think like Nintendo makes games. The Sega makers good, well, used to, because they're, you know, not around much these days, other than as a publisher. They made the fantastic arcade games, home console ports. They were the fast, twitchy, shorter arcade games. Nintendo made games with more depth to them, like Super Mario World with its 90 something bloody exits. They made the depth that, you know, a month later, you could still be playing a Final Fantasy 5 or 6 or a Super Mario World. Good value for
Exactly.
money.
And that was a joke, by the way, folks. I do, in fact, love Nintendo products. Okay, so
So do I.
don't come and kill me.
Like my best mate used to have Super Nintendo. He had like Kill Instinct. We're playing Mortal Kombat 2 or Mortal Kombat 3 in the arcade, which is how I actually met him playing Mortal Kombat in the arcades. My mate Luke, who lives in the UK now, met him playing that. We'd be talking about the games. We'd walk nearly an hour home back to his house, and then we'd start playing Super Nintendo, Donkey Kong Country, Kill Instinct. Later on, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 on 2 players. We played. We just would have this ongoing conversation, not unlike these shows here, where we just like 12, 24 hours a day, we just talked about video games.
It was a big part of life back then. It was
Yeah,
just the way of the world.
it was. Oh,
That logo
we'll
is
get
iconic.
into yeah, it was. We'll get into our topic here, and so the first up, we're just picking our favorite PlayStation games, no particular order. They're not the best of all time, but some of them damn well are the best of all time, and I'll fucking fight you wrestling naked on the front lawn if you disagree with me. But they're just our favorite picks we're going with, and the first one is up for Mark here.
Yeah, Crash Bandicoot. So this one, I suppose, look
I thought he was
on the
called Dash
surface
Dingo.
of it, Dash Dingo. Well, look, you're an Aussie. You
Yeah,
should know the difference between a
Dash
dingo and
Dingo,
a
mate.
bandicoot. Yeah, I think it was actually the working title. I think was like Wally Wombat or something like that.
Yeah,
I
it was
think,
something
but
like that.
yeah. Look, Crash Bandicoot. It's clearly a an attempt by Sony, or at least it always felt to me it was an attempt by Sony to have their own mascot, so their own version of like
100%.
Sonic or Mario. And
Yeah.
you know, it was a hit with me, and one of the main reasons I think it was a hit with me was the PlayStation. It was a great console for like fighting games and racing games,
Hmm.
RPGs. But one genre I thought that kind of fell away after the 16-bit era died off was like the traditional platformer. Like, you know, you
Yeah.
like your game like Sonic and Mario, where you're just like cartoonish character kind of jumping around, collecting things, doing whatever. And Crash Bandicoot for me really filled that gap because, you know, sometimes you do just want to like chill out and kind of bash away
Yeah.
on a platformer, solve a few puzzles, you know, collect whatever
Pull
you
down a
have to
bottomless
collect,
pit.
and like exactly fall down a bottomless pit. You know, the repetitious of or the repetition of continuously falling and dying in the same spot over and over again, only to finally learn
Makes
the
you
trick
happy. You don't
of how
swear.
to do. Exactly, exactly. But it's Crash Bandicoot. It's almost like a missing link game because it kind of goes back to those old kind of Sega Nintendo platformers
Yeah.
where you did have to go through that kind of process of essentially learning the levels off by heart in order to
Yeah.
progress
You
through the
had to.
game. And it was just really fun, and I missed out on it initially. I had only just gotten my PlayStation in around 96, 97, and it was already out. It wasn't until I played Crash Bandicoot 2 around in my friend's house that I actually got interested in just, you know, checking out what the first game was all about. So I think by the time I picked it up, it had actually already gone platinum. I think it was one of the first PlayStation Platinum games I bought. And yeah, it was just I would just spend hours bashing away at this game. It also contained a lot of like 2D parts, which is another kind of throwback, especially with the PlayStation so gung ho about showcasing all these 3D graphics and the new thing. It was pretty cool that there's sections of the games that are in that kind of like traditional 2D, and you're just kind of side scrolling, collecting your apples out of the boxes, doing your spring jumps. And it's like that kind of Sonic mechanic where you really have to like time jumps perfectly, and you kind of get into a zone of just learning the rhyme and the rhythm of the game, and mastering it. It's just got a real classic platforming feel to it, and I just think it worked really well. And in the kind of broader, I suppose, kind of cultural impact of the thing, like Crash Bandicoot definitely worked as a mascot for Sony PlayStation. He wasn't as risque as Laura Croft or some of these other characters that you could put front and center. Also, the fact that he was exclusive to PlayStation as well. He really was their own property. So he was just the perfect kind of face for the console. And I remember, I know you kind of showed it there in the initial slide with the magazine, but I can think of so many examples of just magazine spreads, advertisements, any type of kind of commercial material that was put out to do with PlayStation in the first couple of years. Crash Bandicoot was just front and center, like he was everywhere. So I think that's why I just kind of I had to include it, because apart from the fact that I played the absolute hell out of it, I think as well in kind of the broader sphere of things, it was pretty significant in the whole kind of mythos or iconography of the PlayStation. Like I think a lot of people associate that PlayStation logo with Crash Bandicoot. You're on mute.
Yes, thank you.
There we go.
He Crash was the icon before Lara was co-opted and became the new media, it girl. And like Crash was designed very well on purpose, like your Mickey Mouse, your Felix the Cat, your Popeye, Sonic the Hedgehog, Super Mario. He's an iconic character from his, even if he's not in the video game, he works as a cartoon character. He's got the eyes, the nose, the little chubby, chibi proportions. He's very well designed, and he became a fantastic platform character with good sequels. Number 2 and 3 built on a lot of stuff, good replay value with all the gems and hidden extras in the levels, going back to your Donkey Kong Country with all the extra stuff to replay the levels and collect, get all the secrets, unlock extra levels, and along with Spyro, they became the two um, platform mascots for Sony, while Nintendo had their Mario 64. And your other major platformer thing on PlayStation, you had your Crash, you had your Spyro, and also Tomb Raider, completely different kind of game. But as far as pure actual platforming and jumping around and trial and error deaths and falling down holes, they were the three big games.
Definitely. And don't get me wrong, like they had a few other stabs at trying to get into the
Oh, there was
platforming
Bubsy
kind of space.
3D,
Oh, Bubsy 3D was an awful game. And I'll
Earthworm
tell you,
Jim 3D.
Bubsy 3D. I'll tell you a quick story about Bubsy 3D. A guy
And
I know, childhood friend of mine, actually, I'm still friends with him to this day. But way back in the day,
Oh, you won't be after this
he
story.
he swapped me. He swapped me. He's like, I'm going to swap you an actual full game for one of your demo discs. And I was like, what? Are you serious? You're going to
How
swap me
bad
a
is it?
game for one of these demos? So yeah, and he's like, it's Bubsy 3D. It's kind of like Crash Bandicoot, blah, blah. I was like, yeah, I'll take that. So I swapped him whatever demo. And I'm like, haha, the fool. I'm getting a full game. And he's just getting this demo disc because he wants to play like the new
Who's
football
the
game
fool
or
now?
whatever. Yeah, who's the fool now? I think it only took maybe about like half an hour playing Bubsy 3D, and I was like,
Oh
this
my
is one
god.
of the worst games I've ever played. I think it was the
Yeah,
first time
the
as
camera
a
is
kid.
schizophrenic and just everything
Oh,
about
even
it, collision detection, awful.
terrible. Even as a little kid, yeah, or like I'm not a little kid, but I'm still very young playing it. I'm kind of like, I don't think they finished this game. Like
No.
there'd be parts of the game where it's just like a black screen with your like character
Mhm.
model moving on it, or like entire sections of the graphics, like in the background, would just disappear because they obviously didn't bother finishing off
And the character
coding the
models were
game.
awful.
Terrible, terrible. Just I never, needless to say, I never finished the game, and yeah,
Mhm.
I got the short end of the stick there, definitely.
They did have other decent platformers. Like the first Croc game was a reasonable game. Croc 2, not so much. And you
That's
had
3D.
Spyro 2, Spyro 3, and you had Crash sequels. There was a good number of actual platform games.
It was definitely a dying genre though at that stage, or at
Mm.
least it felt like it
Yeah,
was, because by the time, not to get too off topic, but by the time, like, a PS2 rolled around, they were virtually kind of a dead
yeah.
genre.
I remember that time. It's like that was definitely a bad time for platformers and your mascot games because no one wanted to know. Like your PC had brought in all the graphics card and all your voodoo this and that, brought in all the 3D stuff, pushing all that very hard. You had your what do you call it? Was it Wing Commander with Mark Hamill on that? Like your space fantasy adventures, all that stuff was going on. Well, they're bringing the CD-ROM technology, the audio, the music, the sound effects, the voice acting, all the other media was coming in and kind of basically fucking up basic video game design 101. And it did for a number of years. You had 3DO, you had PC, CD-ROM stuff, you had PlayStation, and but some companies like Naughty Dog took the time to actually develop a good video game that wasn't based around the media, it was based around good platform elements and good game design.
Definitely. They
All right,
weren't
we'll move on.
afraid to make a game that wasn't hyper realistic.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was the other thing too. Like when 3D came along, like a lot of the early 3D, like PC, N64, PS1, it was very crusty and a lot of jagged edges and polygons. Nothing about it was realistic, but there was a big push to go after the adult gamer, the teenage gamer, and to get away from what had sold Nintendo's back in the 80s into a whole different market and different era. We'll go on to the next one. And we've got Metal Gear Solid for the PlayStation and released in 1998 by Konami. And unknown to me at the time is that this was a sequel slash remake to a game that had come about a decade beforehand in 8-bit on the MSX, which was a Japan only computer slash console developed by Microsoft. And they did a really terrible, terrible, shitty port to the Nintendo Entertainment System, which is virtually an entirely different game and not worth bothering with. It's not unplayable, but it's a very different game and really its own entry in the series. But the game had a lot going for it. It had amazing voice acting. You had David, I can't pronounce it, Hayter, fantastic voice actor until they replaced him with bloody Keith Sutherland about number 5 or so in the series. You had very adult themes, but the text I put up there, it's like every bloody 80s action movie, your Rambos and your Robocops and your Terminators and all your spy and espionage, James Bond, all this cool stuff rolled into this amazing game that was very mature and adult, but was full of all sorts of bizarre Japanese humor and weird stuff at the same time. And it was a phenomenal game, like fantastic game mechanics, the sound design, the voice acting, the graphics, although they're fairly limited by 3D standards of today, and the faces look terrible. You can't really see their faces at all. But for the time, they were outstanding. They were really progressive and just like setting the bar at a high point up here. And all the intelligent um, conversations, the scenarios, the boss battles, the themes in the game about like bloody genocide and war and other stuff. Like there was a lot of really serious, heavy material in this game that we totally did not understand because me and my mate played it entirely in Japanese the first time through. So we didn't know what but the gameplay elements stood out that well that when we did get to play it in English eventually, we got to see how good the writing was, the voice acting, all the scenarios. What are your impressions of this game, Mark?
I absolutely loved this game.
Correct answer.
Yeah, it's a brilliant game. It's a brilliant game, and like I hadn't really been aware until later on in life that it had. Yeah, it is kind of like a quasi sequel, kind of follow up to those
Hmm.
older series of games. But when I
Yeah, good
first
game.
played this, once again, my first taste of it was from a demo disc, which essentially it shows
Yes.
you the opening cutscene from the game, and then I think you got to play through maybe about 7 or 8 minutes worth from
Mm.
the initial level where you're kind of infiltrating that kind of command
Yeah,
center.
the
But
entry point where he comes in, and if you fucked
exactly.
around with it, you could play it for a good 20 minutes if you just wasted time and kind of mucked around with the mechanics of it.
Yes, yeah, and it was one of those things straight away. I think everybody probably does this because it was my first time playing any type of game that required you to be sneaky and use stealth. It took me like a couple of goes to realize, no, wait a minute,
Yeah,
don't just charge at those two
don't just shoot and
guards
punch
around the
everything.
corner. Yeah, 'cause the
The
alarms
arcades
keep
have
going
ruined it.
off, and then and then you keep on ruining everything. It's like, no, you have to take your time. You're gonna crawl, you're gonna sneak, you're gonna stick to
Yeah.
walls, you're gonna look round corners. And then once you kind of grasp the mechanics of how this world actually worked, where it was all about kind of stealth and espionage, it just made for this brilliant experience where you're just like, some of the situations in the game are so tense, especially when you're playing it for the first time. Like nowadays, you kind of can look back and go, "Oh yeah, I know if I just go this particular route and do this and that, I can get past." But when you're playing for the first time and you're really conscious of the fact that you could be caught, or it could fuck the whole thing up, it's really
Yep.
tense. And
Yeah, it is.
there was just so little things in the game, like as I'm sure a lot of people who played it remember, like you could smoke cigarettes, and people,
Yeah.
when you have that,
And it
kind of for the first time where you realize that the cigarettes actually do have a purpose. Later on when you're
yes,
using the
the
smoke
lasers,
to see the laser beams and stuff, there's
MacGyver
just so
style.
many. Yeah, it's such little clever things like that really just added to the
Mm.
world of the game, and you felt like the whole time during any type of cutscene, or even just those little scenes where you're communicating with HQ and the kind of back and forth dialogue, it did kind of
Roy
feel like you
Campbell.
were. Yeah, yeah, but it felt like you were in an action movie, like you were
Yeah.
so kind of submerged in that world. It was just a phenomenal game. It really was, and a real kind of breakthrough game, because it did spawn a lot of stealthy themed,
Mm.
kind of
Oh,
spy games.
espionage.
Yeah, and like lots of stuff came out of it. So it really was a game changer, no pun intended, in that respect.
Absolutely. Yeah, like, the game mechanics really test you because you're used to arcade and action games, which this is an action game, but it's also a stealth game, and it forces you to adapt to a new way of playing, which is kind of counterintuitive. But once you play the first, it doesn't have levels, but for sake of argument, once you play the first couple of areas or levels, you understand you've got to sneak around, as you said, you've got to hide behind corners. But even the way you've got to press the button to crouch down, go up, pop out of the corner. This is, there was no Gears of War back then. There was no um, Splinter Cell or any of these games didn't exist. Like these games, those games exist because of this game and the mechanics that it established. And it did all of this, all of these amazing mechanics, the sound, the music, told a good story, had amazing voice acting, and it's what you call punching above your weight in boxing terms. As it just did so much, and like the second game was fantastic, the third game was fantastic as well. But just what they did on such a limited system as the PlayStation, which was like a, I mean, it's one of my favorite consoles of all time, but it's like a bargain basement PC. The stats are very limited if you look at what it can do and can't do. Its strengths are really in the audio, not so much in the graphics. So what they established with this game and what Kojima was able to do with this game, tell an intelligent story, which is very much like a metafiction postmodern commentary, not just on 80s action films, but on real life war, and do it in a way that's serious, that's hard hitting, that's satisfying to video gamers, but also has resonant themes and ideas that if you look into it, they really hit you in the heartstrings, man. Some of the stuff in this game and the story, and there's stuff about genetic engineering, about genocide, about cloning, about war machines and the Cold War. There's just so much. Like you could easily do a whole show just on this game. This just an incredible game to unpack.
It's a great game, and it's got an absolutely banging soundtrack as well. Like the actual in-game
Yeah,
music is fantastic.
it is
And
fantastic.
look at that, the
The
VR
themes still
missions.
haunt me, that like, do, do, and the end theme too with the voiceover that has, it goes from video games to live action footage in Alaska, and it has a voiceover going, "Snake, you must live, you must go on." And before the sequels came, and you didn't know, just like the stupid Spider-Man '90s comics, was he the real guy or the clone guy? Spoiler alert, because there's a whole plot about clones and duplicates in this game. But yeah, it was an amazing game, and like just fantastic. We just like Silent Hill and Final Fantasy and other games. Me and my mates stayed up all bloody night on a Friday, Saturday night playing this game and did not sleep.
I can see that. Yeah, it's definitely a game where you could sink hours and hours of
Hmm.
your time into.
Mm. And speaking of extra hours, they released what you would call on PC an expansion. Like, you had Doom and you have extra chapters. This is like another chapter of Metal Gear, but it's not the main game. It was VR missions, or it's called special missions, but I always knew it as VR missions when we played it, which is why it's got that green and blue kind of Tron look to it. And they're all scenarios that are like take about 1 to 3 minutes to complete. They're teaching you the mechanics of the game, but you can play them along with the game, before it, after, at any time. They're just complete hardcore gamer scenarios where the objective is you have to complete whatever the mission thing gives you, devoid of story, dialogue, other stuff. It's just hardcore teaching the mechanics. And if you do play through these missions, it makes you a lot better at this game or the sequels, because the same ideas, even if they change the controls, carry over into the sequels.
Yeah. And for some of our listeners, if any of you younger people are watching out there, this is what we had as gamers before DLC. Before you could download the
Yes,
DLC,
very
you
much.
actually have to go and just buy another disc to
And
expand on your game. But yeah,
and the
it was kind of another kind of groundbreaking aspect, because I don't recall many other games doing something like this. At least
no,
on in that during that time, I can't like there was one or two maybe that might have had like an expansion pack, but this really kind of sticks out in my mind because I
mostly it
remember
was
even seeing
sequels.
that in the shop and being like, "Whoa, another Metal Gear game!"
Mm. And I think the blue shot I've got there, I'm pretty sure that must be from like the GameCube remake or something, because it's much more crisper looking there. And I did play, they did have remade this game in the GameCube era, where they remade a lot of the graphics into full 3D. Where it was a 3D game to start with, but there's a lot of 2D textures and stuff in there. They remade it full 3D, and they actually, in the GameCube version, went back to the original voice actors, but re-recorded all the voice dialogue for that version. So that was a really good version. They redid as well. But I still prefer the original PlayStation version overall. Just has a certain charm and unique appeal to it.
Terrific game and
Mm,
expansion.
yeah, and so on to another Mark pick next. If you know,
Oh,
what is it? Know your role, shut your mouth.
yeah, here we go. So look, spoiler, folks, for those of you who don't know, but if you've watched previous episodes, I'm sure you do. I'm a big wrestling fan, and
Wrestling. What?
I know that phony ass wrestling. I'm just such a
Tony
massive mark
Jabroni.
for it. But yeah, so look, I suppose to go back a little bit, the PlayStation was fertile ground for wrestling games. There was a lot of wrestling games on the
Hmm.
on the Sony PlayStation, and before the SmackDown games became a thing, I used to play a lot of WWF Attitude and WWF Warzone.
Yeah,
I
me too. I
I
played a lot of
also would
those.
have played a lot of the WCW games like WCW Nitro and
What
and
about the
and,
No
and games
Mercy
like
on
that.
64 and that?
Oh, of course, yeah. Oh, No Mercy, like
Mhm.
that's one of the goats
Yeah,
of all time of
yeah,
wrestling games. But when it came to the PlayStation, the original PlayStation, this SmackDown 2, the sequel to the original SmackDown game, it was just a barn burner of a game. And this is one of these games I had. I had the modded version of the game. So the
Yeah.
one I came
What
with,
was
I think
different?
already had it had the characters were all already unlocked. So the what you
Ah,
usually have to do is play through season mode to unlock the guys.
yeah, yeah.
On my modded one, they were just all there from the start, and
Nice.
there was a couple other little kind of glitchy things that were included from the start of the game. But the core game itself, for a wrestling fan in the year 2000s, which I was, this game was just a total hit. Me and my mates would play this game to death. We would all sit around in our living room. You could do multiplayer if you had the multi-tap connector to get 4-man battle royals or fatal four ways, or you could have four of you go into the Royal Rumble. It was just a fantastic game. It introduced double team moves for tag team matches. It had a massive roster of stars that were just current stars at the time, because that was one thing about the first SmackDown game. I think it was like originally developed in 1999, and by the time it was released, it kind of had a bit of an out of date roster, and even the way some
Yeah,
of the character
did.
models appeared in the game, they looked about a year or two behind. Whereas when SmackDown 2 came out, it felt really current. Everybody was wearing their correct attire, and a lot of the people you were watching on TV at the time were actually featured in the game. So it
Mhm.
was a big deal just to have an up to date wrestling game with all the current stars. And there's so many game modes. You had your hardcore matches, your table matches. As I mentioned briefly earlier, they introduced proper double team moves for the tag team matches, and like there's nothing more fun than like you and your mate going up against two other mates in tag team action. Like, and the amount of real fights that would ensure due to the dirty tactics being employed in the game. But yeah, I just loved it. I loved playing through the season mode, even if it had really dodgy cutscenes that actually had just written dialogue. You had to read everything. It's like DX is jumping the Rock backstage while this text scrolls across the screen explaining
Yeah,
what's going on. And
yeah, the
but
text.
even little things like they would play the wrestler's entrance before the match, and it would actually have the character model of the wrestler would be on screen, but with an actual video of their
Yeah, the
entrance
video.
theme music playing behind them. Like, it was like, looking back now, it's obviously very basic and simple, but it was a really big deal back then, just even to be seeing these videos and hearing the music. And
Yeah.
yeah, the game itself, it had a really simple control system, just like the first SmackDown game. It was quite easy
It
to
was
pick up
like
and play.
directed and button would do a move and
Exactly, it was a real departure from a lot of the previous wrestling games. The kind of in
mhm.
There was a lot of you needed to input a lot of commands in the old games to do this moves, whereas
Yeah,
in
like fire
SmackDown
wave.
you're only ever like with SmackDown games, you're only ever a couple of buttons away from doing a
Mm.
special move. So it was a
Makes it
very
more
easy game
accessible.
to pick up and play. So I know there's some people who they would definitely praise a game like No Mercy for its kind of intricacies and how you can kind of perform all these kind of complex kind of wrestling sequences and holds and whatnot. But I always just liked the kind of arcade feel and the pick up and play kind of mentality that SmackDown games brought to the table, because it really was easy just to throw the game on and like just get instantly into it. And if you had another person there who wasn't really that familiar with the game or was just starting the game for the first time, it didn't really take them long to actually pick up the
Mhm.
mechanics.
Yeah,
And
that's one of
because
the strengths.
a lot of people I would play the game with, they didn't even really like wrestling, and it's not like they didn't really
Mhm.
care about it, but they still were able to enjoy the game and kind of get a lot of
Mhm.
fun out of it just because it was so easy to pick up and play.
Yeah, that's good. That reminds me when you're saying people not even into wrestling. The day my brother got Burnout 3 on PlayStation 2, and I'm jumping topics, but we'll come back. Just relax, people. Burnout 3 on PlayStation 2. My brother had that, and they've got like a racing mode, and you crash and do his stuff. Then they have like a stunt mode where you've got to crash on purpose over all these ramps and stuff and do as much damage as you can to the car and slow motion replays. And me, my brother, and my sister, who doesn't play games at all, but has played a fair amount of Pokemon on original Game Boy and played a fair amount of Burnout 3 the day we got that. we sat and played that for about 6 hours, just passing the controller back and forth between us. And it was that casual thing where it was easy to get into and fun. And each time you do it, you just like trying to outdo each other. SmackDown had that going on too, where it's nice, easy, casual controls to get into. It's fun as hell to do the animations and face plant people and chuck them over in or over the ropes and all that stuff. I only had the first one. I never had the second one, which was the same basic game that expanded upon it, bigger roster, more accurate to the what was going on at the time. And I did enjoy the create a character mode too. I'd make like a big giant, like Andre the Giant sized character, give him the T-Rex head, give him like Western chaps pants and stuff like that. Like stuff like that was really fun.
Yeah, some of the character models for the creator wrestler were really funny.
Mhm.
You could have guys like practically like in Godzilla suits and
Yeah,
stuff like that. It was kind of a
same in
first
War
proper
Zones and that.
taste because the original SmackDown, it didn't have a fantastic creator wrestler. Like, it was
No, it
okay.
was very
It was
limited.
pretty basic. But SmackDown 2, you could really do a lot, and you could take existing character models and, recolor the polygons if you wanted to, like, alter like ring attire and stuff like that. Like, it came a long way from the first game in terms of, the create a wrestler side of things. Like,
Yeah,
it was a pretty big deal at the time.
yeah. I
And
love
is
the
this
creator wrestler stuff.
I think as well, I'm looking at that power move pro wrestling
Yeah.
picture there as well on the screen. I do remember seeing that, just around. Like, I never actually owned a copy of the game. I don't even know if I played it, but
Not
on,
neither did
on the
I.
subject on the subject of kind of modded PlayStations and SmackDown, a friend of mine actually got a Japanese wrestling game that was
Mhm.
also developed by THQ and Jack Specific, that used the SmackDown 2 engine. I think it was made for New Japan Wrestling in
Yeah,
Japan and was
there's a
never
few of them.
released anywhere else. But we were able to play that on the modded PlayStation because it was the exact same controls, exact same layout. Everything was in Japanese, but it didn't matter because you knew
Mhm.
exactly,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was wrestling. You knew exactly what you wanted to do. But it was a pretty cool example of being able to play essentially the same game but with a different skin on it.
Yeah, like the history of wrestling games, if anyone gets into it, if you followed fighting games, wrestling games, all the old wrestling games were Japanese wrestling. There was a few Western ones that were not great, but it goes back to the arcade, Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Nintendo. You got Fire Pro, a lot of other long running series. There's loads of Japanese wrestling games that are actually good because they're made by companies that have been making games for decades and would just crap out one here and there that was actually worth playing. And finally, Western developers went, "Oh, we should probably make some good wrestling games for modern people. What do we do? Well, we go back to the Japanese people and get them to make it, and then we slap all our icons and stuff on it and say it's ours." Is what they did.
It was a winning formula.
Yeah, it worked. It worked. That's the important part. It's not that I'm trying to be critical of them. I'm just saying that's kind of the history of wrestling games. Okay, we'll move on to the next game, which is King of Fighters 98, which was an arcade game and also released for the Neo Geo home system. And this game I have played at least 1,000 hours of back then, not recently. I mean, I have this on PS4 as a download and all that, but the PS1 version I played at least 1,000, probably at least 2,000 hours of. When you count solo play, and then we used to play with my mates on the weekend. And my mate Luke was the guy who was into this game. I'd played Street Fighter, I'd played other fighting games. I did not know this game in serious really before this. He was the one that got me into it. I'd seen him play 96, 97, 95 on PlayStation, but it's kind of in the background. I didn't really care. But he wanted someone to play with, so he started teaching me all the moves and how to do the supers. It's a very technical game and takes a lot of learning, but like, if I sat down today, I pretty much know the entire move list for every single character that's on that character roster there by heart, just like I know Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter 2 Turbo, because those are the three series I played the most of, being Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, King of Fighters. I mean, there's other stuff, there's your Soul Calibers, your Tekken, played a fair amount of those, but King of Fighters 98, man, I love the character roster, and I used to be kind of like a Street Fighter guy back then, but this game won me over with its design, the gameplay systems, the moves, the combos, the combat, the style of the characters, the art design is a very big part of these games and series. When you look at the artwork, there's a lot of stuff in there. It's about fashion. It gets into like your manga kind of thing. It's more, it might go over the head of the average Westerner, but it's very metrosexual. A lot of the fashion stuff in there where the boys are kind of a little bit feminine and maybe some of the girls are a bit masculine stuff. That's very ordinary in Japanese culture as far as manga and anime, but to the Western, it can be off putting. But man, King of Fighters was just an amazing game. I played so much of it, and the character roster in this particular game is like a best of all the three games that came before it. There's a long running story, just like Street Fighter in this series, but this game is an out of continuity game that doesn't really have a story other than it's a kind of, they call it dream match because it's just combining all the previous characters. But you get this amazing roster in that top left image there. And then there's alternate versions that have an entirely different move sets for about a half dozen characters in this game, which are like having a whole another half dozen characters. And the 3-on-3 combat is before any of the tag-based games that came years later. So any of you like your Tekken tag tournaments or your Marvel vs. Capcom and your crossover games, they were all borrowing from this game. And for anyone that doesn't know King of Fighters or Neo Geo stuff, you had Fatal Fury, you had Art of Fighting, there was a bunch of other games. This is like the original Marvel vs. Capcom. All these characters are crossing over from different games into one series that ran for about more than 10 games because it's still going, and had this crazy story in it, amazing designs, amazing characters and skill sets. The winning poses, I like your Street Fighter winning poses, but every character in this has about 3 or 4 unique winning animations that are just like so stylized and so anime, and they're really memorable. The things they yell out, that even today I think of things like Terry going "oh rah, rah," which means like come on at the start of the match, and it's just an amazing game, and I never get tired of it. And as much as I love Street Fighter, Tekken, Soul Calibur, all the other good classic fighting games through the 90s, this is my number one fighting game of all time. I don't care what they make between now and I die, it'll still be number one 20 years from now.
Well, I'll not fight you on that, Johnny. But
Fight me, Jimmy.
but yeah, no. When it comes to this game, particularly, unfortunately, it was later on when I actually finally got to play
Mhm,
these King of Fighters games, because I just didn't really like, to me, as someone who knew nothing about them and just seeing the boxes in the shop,
mhm.
to me it just looked like a generic Street
Just look
Fighter.
like anime, whatever.
Yeah, I didn't really understand the depth and significance of it. It wasn't until later on, I think around PlayStation 2 time, they released, it was like a King of Fighters collection.
Yeah.
And there was this game and a few other versions. And it wasn't until then that I started playing them. I was like, wow, these are really, really good games. And the
Mhm.
mechanics is so well balanced. It's kind of like it's kind of like the game Capcom used to put out when they still had a soul, as in like they would reward you for actually putting time into the game and
Yes.
learning
Yeah.
the mechanics and the kind of the just the art of how to win the fight in the game. And there was a level of depth there that maybe there wasn't so much in, especially in later fighting games that came out afterwards. And like you were saying, it really pioneered that kind of multi-tier kind of style of on-screen
Mhm.
combat where you can have these like 3-on-3 and there's like so
Yeah.
much kind
Well,
of going on the screen. And this is before like your X-Men versus Street Fighters, or at least around the
yes.
same time anyway. Like I know Marvel versus Capcom is the one that everybody always associates with the, the 3-on-3 combat, but like
Yeah. Like
KO KOF was in there long before any of them.
mm. The main distinction between King of Fighters and what they did in the tag battle games is King of Fighters, it's round to round. So if you each pick 3 fighters, you beat one, in the next round, the next guy comes in. what they innovated or changed in X-Men vs Street Fighter Marvel vs Capcom is you could tag in real time to swap the character in. But the whole idea of it pretty much comes from these games. This was the first game to have team-based battles, but long before you had Marvel vs Capcom 2 or 3-on-3, you had King of Fighters in 1994 as like the first game of the series. And the whole
Isn't
series from
that
the start is the best of their other games, just like Marvel vs. Capcom. It's a crossover of all their different series. Some of them go back to 8-bit arcade platformer games and stuff who had never been in fighting games, but now they're in this. Ikari Warriors, Ralph and Clark are a team in this.
Yeah, it's like that kind of with like Mortal Kombat trilogy. It's not really like
Yes,
a
yes.
canon game as such, but it's bringing all your previous player
All your
characters
favorites.
from all your favorites in one. We don't need it to be in continuity or be in storyline. It's just a good excuse to bring everybody into the tent,
Yeah.
and you've got a big deep roster then that you can
Mm-hmm.
chug your way through.
The roster's so deep. It's like playing Tekken 3, Soul Calibur. I don't know. I say 4 or 5, whenever it got more popular in the competition scene past the early games, which I wasn't really into, but I had mates that played, competition level games and that sort of thing. They really developed the roster. Virtua Fighter 4, another one I played a bit of, where you had a massive roster, massive skill set. And if you'd never played it, it would take you probably a good year just to learn how to really get into it, learn all this, the moves, the combos, the skill sets, but learn the tactics, how it works, the balance, the unbalance of it. Amazing game. But we'll move on from this, otherwise I'll keep crapping on. So move on to another Mark's next choice.
Okay, Dino Crisis. So
What kind of crisis is that?
Crisis of Prehistoric Predators. Oh, look, Dino Crisis. So I know we'll be talking about Resident Evil games later on, but
Oh,
for those
spoiler
of you
alert.
who don't know, this is essentially it's Resident Evil with
With
dinosaurs. That's
dinosaurs.
the basic
Dinosaurs glued
premise.
onto their heads and fins glued on their heads and
Yeah, they've super glued. They've rounded up some poor iguanas and they've
yeah.
they've super glued on some like cardboard spikes on them.
You can
But
feel the influence of like Jurassic Park and Resident Evil because Jurassic Park was big in this era, and it's like genetic engineering is like a whole big theme in this game,
yeah, it's hitting that vibe straight off the
and
bat.
time
So
travel.
and time travel. It's all the kind of glorious elements of science fiction and horror just kind of chucked
Yep,
all in there.
and
And
you
it's
got a sexy bird running around shooting things.
yeah, Regina was a beautiful woman, no doubt. So
best
yeah,
best named protagonist ever.
possibly. But yeah, so look, so the like I said, the basic mechanic of the game, it's like a tank based game that runs essentially off that Resident Evil engine, and
Yeah, that
they've replaced
angles
the
and
main
controls.
enemies, which would have the Resident Evil enemies were zombies. They're essentially replaced with dinosaurs as your main
Mhm.
enemy. So it's one of those games where it's kind of been forgotten in time because even though it was fairly well received because there were so many just like instant mega hits on PlayStation and just
Yeah,
bigger games, it's kind of been largely forgotten about in the ether. But Dino Crisis was like a major favorite of mine, just because look, I'm a massive dinosaur fan anyway, and I was a big fan of the Resident Evil games, and it kind of it kind of did succeed in making dinosaurs a little bit scary because
yeah.
you'd
The
associate
horror
like
elements are good.
Jurassic Park. It's like Jurassic Park. It's an action adventure movie, but I wouldn't really call it scary. But Dino
No, it's
Crisis, it
more like
would
Indie Jones.
yeah, exactly. Whereas with the type of atmosphere in Dino Crisis, it really carried over that Resident Evil claustrophobia, where you're
Yes.
kind of stuck in these small rooms or these tight corridors. There's like raptors chasing you down. It's pretty intense. Like you're trying, like you would run from a corridor and escape into a room, and then the raptor will just follow you in the door. Like there
Yeah,
was
and you
an
could hear the
extra added,
sounds of it coming up to you.
and there was just so many little touches in the game that they both took over from Resident Evil, but also they added their own kind of unique level of what they would call panic horror to the game. Like
Mhm.
for example, if your character gets wounded in the game and you bleed, your blood will attract other
Yeah,
dinosaurs in
drips.
the area. So if you're wandering around the different corridors and stuff and you haven't healed up and you're like dripping blood, like before long you're gonna have like a pack of raptors sniffing up your
Mhm.
ass. Like, so there was like a really interesting kind of atmosphere baked into the game with touches like that. You also have the Tyrannosaurus Rex in the game, which essentially
Yeah, he burst
stalks
through the
you.
walls.
Yeah, so you first kind of meet him in a big kind of cutscene where his head smashes through the window of an office and he tries to get you, and then throughout the game as you progress, you'll keep on meeting him again and again as he kind of stalks you as you make your way through this facility. I suppose, folks, I probably jumped the gun a bit when I just jumped in and said, "Oh, look, it's Resident Evil with dinosaurs." For those of you who don't actually know what the game is about, essentially there's an island where a kind of dubious scientist is performing experiments using like an
Highly
experimental
ethical.
form of energy, and like a crack team of like secret agent Navy SEALs type commando people are sent in to investigate what's going on in the island. Needless to say, they stumble upon chaos. There's like a facility that's half destroyed. There's dinosaurs running around and lots of intrigue and espionage and all sorts of plot twists and turns ensue. And we eventually find out that the dubious scientist was messing around with like time travel stuff, and dinosaurs were accidentally transported into present day, and that's why
Yep,
they exist on this island. And that story just gets even crazier once we go to the sequels like Dino Crisis 2.
it
And
does.
I won't even talk about Dino Crisis 3 because it's a heap of shit. But Dino
Yeah,
Crisis 1 and 2, they really were fantastic games, and they took so much of that Resident Evil spirit of just it always feels like the game is just giving you enough to get through and to survive. You can never really just kind of go off the rails and waste a load of
no,
ammo or anything. You always have to kind of think ahead. Is like, okay, what enemy am I going to encounter next? I've only got like 3 shotgun shells left and like a clip on my pistol. I might not be able to proceed further without going and running around looking for ammo. You're always kind of in a bit of a panic trying to
yep,
make your way through the game and journey on, which is another kind of trait from the Resident Evil games as well. But like I said, it really kind of made, at least for me at the time playing it. You're sitting up, you're playing this game late at night, and it did have its jump scares. It definitely did have its shock
there's
moments
a
to make you kind of
few
like
of them.
leap out of the chair type moments. And now they remedied that somewhat with the sequel. They made Dino Crisis 2 a lot more action driven,
Yeah,
and
you get
it's a lot
combos
more
and
of
lots
a
of ammo,
you get yeah, you get combo points, you get loads of ammo, you get rewarded. The more enemies you kill in a row, the more points you get, and
and
it's
it
a
loads a lot faster too between the camera angles, scene to scene, so you can move faster in the game.
yes, that's right. It was a totally different experience. Still a brilliant
Very
game,
arcade
but
style.
definitely a different experience. You could probably compare it to like Alien and Aliens. Like one's
Yeah,
like
that's exactly what I was
a tr-
thinking of these games.
yeah,
One's
it's
the
like the
corridor
horror thriller
horror, and the
versus
next
the
is
action.
yeah, the big action
You
sequel.
said it. Yeah, you
Turns it up
nailed it.
to
You nailed
11.
it. Did you play much of this game yourself, or?
I played a lot of both number 1 and 2. I never got to play the dog shit one that came out a decade later on Xbox after it was borderline cancelled. I played a lot of the first one, completed it a few times, not as much as Resident Evil ones, I guess, but because it came out later. And number 2, I really fell in love with number 2 because, like the Aliens, it went from claustrophobic horror, limited ammo to I'm running around arcade style and just gunning everything down and buggy raptors. I'm getting combos and there's dual wielding in the second game with like Uzis.
Yeah.
So I love
It's
action games.
almost
So that, yeah,
it's almost like revenge. It's like we made you
yeah,
suffer so much in the first
yeah.
game, having to conserve ammo. Now we're just saying, look,
Mhm.
go nuts, do what you want.
Yeah, but they're really well designed games, and I think also something that probably doesn't get thought about now is the character of Regina, who's not probably not fleshed out a whole lot, but she's a decent female protagonist in the game. She's not up there with people know you Lara Crofts and other characters from back then, but she kind of gets forgotten about. But she's a decent, well-designed character of that era.
Yeah, I think the failure of Dino Crisis 3 is probably the reason why Dino Crisis 1 and 2 are not spoken about in
Yeah,
high regard. And I
I
think
blame Microsoft.
yeah, from what I understand from just watching a few YouTube videos and reading a few bits and pieces here and there over the years, I think essentially they actually had developed Dino Crisis 3 fairly early after, or not
Yeah.
long after Dino Crisis 2 was released.
Hmm.
What happened was, I think, the Dino Crisis 3 was originally supposed to be set in like an overrun city filled with dinosaurs in the present day, which sounds like a really great idea
Kind of like
for a
Jurassic
game.
Park movie I just watched recently.
Exactly, except it would probably have been much better than that, I'd
Yeah,
imagine. But
it was less
I think what
insects
happened
buzzing
is
around.
when the 9/11 terror attacks happened, Capcom got cold feet about having a game set in like a wrecked city with like burning
Ah,
buildings and
didn't know
stuff
that.
like that. So they pulled the plug on it essentially and told the
Uh-huh.
developers, look, we want you to get rid of anything to do with the city or anything that you had previously planned. And then so the game was pretty much shelved then for years with nothing done.
Yeah, it was a
And
long
then when
time.
they
I remember it was
finally
development hell for a long time, but didn't know
oh,
why.
ages. And then when they did finally green light it to be redeveloped, they gave it like a science fiction set in space twist that
Mhm.
nobody wanted, set like 50 years or something after the last game. None of the
Jason X.
characters from the previous game. Yeah, it was just a terrible idea. It's also an awful game to play mechanically. It's a really hard game to play. Like because I was a little bit of a completionist, I went and tracked it down and got myself a copy, and I didn't even finish the game. I couldn't. I just thought
Mhm.
I thought it was awful. So
I still
look,
never
Dino
played it.
Crisis. Don't ever play it, folks. If you haven't played it, don't play it now. If you want to play a Dino Crisis game, go onto the PlayStation Network and download Dino Crisis 1 and 2 if they're
Mhm.
still there. Hopefully they are, and you'll have a
Yeah.
great time.
Yeah, I never got to play the third one. I've got a broken Xbox, original Xbox out the back, and I never managed to track it down. I think I saw it probably once in a store, and I'd read reviews, and I was going to get it at some point, but it wasn't easy to even buy. But whatever, it's not worth talking about. We'll move on. Okay, so the next game, this is one of my picks here. Is we got Final Fantasy VII. This is a very cliched pick for PlayStation, but like I have to admit, a good number of my choices are. I could pick just all RPGs or all fighting games or whatever, but I was trying to pick what were PlayStation exclusive games and ones that really had an impact in society, but also had an impact in my life personally. And one of my best mates who had the old modded chip PlayStation, he was getting all sorts of imports out of Japan. He had a modded PlayStation. He had a bootleg of the Japanese version of this. So all Japanese text is playing this. It didn't have the proper SCART cable at the time, so it was in black and white on a CRT. He played this game to completion. Don't ask me how, because there's a lot of stuff here you really need to know what the hell was going on in the text and the mini games and that outside of the battles. But he played it to completion, and he'd go into the game stores and read the magazines. There'd be little tips and things, and he'd be stuck for a few weeks and go back to it. But he completed this game, and I pretty much ignored it because I'm like, fuck that black and white shit. I'm not Japanese text and black and white. What is this? The silent era? We're trying to buy PlayStation games, man. But when he got the English version, that is interested, and I got to watch him play through the complete game before I even touched a button or had anything to do with it. I'd seen the whole game all the way through, so I'd seen all the amazing stuff in it, how impressive it was. By the time he was playing the English version, he was on to the magazine secrets about how to fight ultimate weapon and how to get all the best materials and special stuff in it. And I finally played it maybe like 2 years after he had it, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. Like the story was cool, all the summons, the animation was cool. It's got a lot of existential angst going on in there. It's got some Blade Runner sort of themes and cyberpunk stuff going on, mixed in with the medieval fantasy of the previous classic Final Fantasy games. And it was an amazing game that we all know it as PlayStation game, but I remember before this ever come out, I remember seeing the screenshots for the Nintendo 64 version, which was developed for that. That's where it started. That was the project. Square had a long running relationship with Nintendo for the previous Final Fantasy games, along with other games. But Square ended up parting ways with um, sorry, Square ended up parting ways with Nintendo and ended up partnering with Sony, and that's a whole little rabbit hole itself. There's a whole story behind that. There's entire 700-page books that cover portions of that era of the history of video games, where um, Sony was going to partner with Sega at one point. They were going to partner with Nintendo, and both of them end up not doing that. Sony ImageSoft was its own little development studio, and then main Sony ended up saying, "Bugger Lotties, we're going to go make our own console." Started off as a PS1 Super Nintendo hybrid thing. That's why it's got the 4-button layout, the cross D-pad controller, and the L&R buttons at the top. Made their own console, went out, said, "Stuff you, Nintendo. We want this expanded CD-ROM format that's coming out on PC. We want these full motion videos, the animation, the extra music, and other stuff," and made this like truly epic game that a lot of people will say, "Oh, it's overrated," and there's other games that are better, and it's very bloated and development hell and all kinds of. It was an amazing epic game that, like, you go from Final Fantasy 5 and 6 on Super Nintendo, which are absolutely fantastic games and arguably have better stories and even better designed games as far as their scenario and consistency. The Final Fantasy 7, however, was just it was just they just blew the bloody doors off, man. They're just like, "We're gonna cram everything, every idea we've ever had, we couldn't fit into a little Super Nintendo cartridge. We're putting on the CD-ROM," and it still wouldn't fit. So they made it take up 3 discs. And people were looking into sort of history of games and video game theory. Like, the video game itself doesn't take up that much space. Maybe one or two of the CD-ROMs, which are average 600, 700 megabytes on a disc, but all the audio and the full motion videos slash cutscenes, that took up a lot of space on a CD-ROM compared to, say, a DVD or Blu-ray. And the music, as they originally did it, they did a lot of orchestral style stuff, as they've done traditionally for a long time with Square. Amazing music, amazing scenarios, and they actually wanted to have the original music uncompressed in the game, and they tried to do it, but found it took up more space in the game itself. So they ended up compressing it into, I forget, I think it was a MIDI format like on PC. So the audio doesn't sound quite as good as it could sound. You can actually find online uncompressed full soundtracks for this game, which have like the full sound quality that's not compressed in any way. And over the years, there's been in Japan and in Australia and in Europe, other countries, live orchestral performances of the greatest hits of games like this, or Shadow of the Colossus, or Zelda, and those kind of games.
It was a big deal, definitely. I remember a lot of the hype for this game
A
before it
lot of
even
hype.
came out.
Very obscure
The
what the
ads,
fuck it even was.
yeah, because I had no knowledge of the previous Final Fantasy games, prior to
No.
this coming out. So you see all these ads on TV, and there's like, it's going to be over 15,000 programmers and animators, and they're showing you
Yeah.
all the cutscenes, and I was like, what
It's like a
is
Disney
this?
from the 30s.
Yeah, but once you got actually playing it, it was a great game, and
Mhm.
this was definitely one of those games where having the kind of either the chip, or if you had the kind of the mod box for the back of the
Yeah.
PS1. After I finished the game, the first time round, I went into the kind of settings through the mod pack, and you were able to bring up all the music files. You're able to bring up
Yeah.
the all the FMV videos. So after I'd finished the game kind of once, because it was such a big slog kind of to get through, especially the first time round, I just kind of got a bit lazy. And anytime I wanted to re-experience anything from the game, I just go on to the disc. I just pop the disc in the tray and go into the settings, and watch all the kind of FMV video sequences. which I still even do the odd time now. Just look them up on YouTube because you don't need a disc
Yeah.
to do that stuff
All
anymore.
the
But
melancholy.
yeah, yeah. But it was such it's one of those games as well where if you were to play it today and you knew what you were doing, you'd finish the game relatively quick. You know, you'd get through it, and it wouldn't take you that long to do everything you needed to do to get like a good run of the game done. But back then, like with a lot of these games, it felt like this epic
Yeah.
kind of adventure to get through, and it always felt like you were only kind of making a minimal amount of progress depending on how well the game was going for you, and how maybe if you were lucky enough to have, like you mentioned with your mate, if you happen to like have a guidebook or something that could make things a little bit easier for you.
Yeah.
But with a lot of these games, and especially with Final Fantasy, there was a definite kind of learning curve kind of go
Mhm.
associated with it as well, where you needed to put the time into the game,
Yeah.
for the game to give back to you. You weren't just going to pick up this game and just like blast through it the first time without kind of
No.
any discipline. Like you
Gonna
needed
get
to
your
put
ass
the time
kicked.
in. But it was one of those things like once you put the time in, it rewarded you, and each time you got maybe just like, and it's crazy now, like because some of those FMV cutscenes, they're like burned into your mind, but then when you actually kind of watch them back now, it's only like a 9 second clip or like a
Yeah.
13 second clip of that, but it you would spend hours back in the day working towards just getting that little morsel of
Mhm.
story and to progress on. It's like it's something I don't know if I could have the patience to do these days,
Yeah.
but I loved doing
Well,
it back
I'm
then.
I'm probably gonna play it again in the next year sometime because 'cause it's been re-released as digital format, PS4, PS5. You can get a cart version on the Switch, and I like my physical media. I have this on PS4, and I kinda started it but didn't go anywhere. So I'm gonna pick up the Switch version because it has 7 and 8 on one little cartridge the size of half your thumb, and I know it'll still work 10 or 15 years from now, whereas the digital version will probably fuck up at some point. One of the other things before we move on to the next one is I love in this game it gives so much because it has all these secrets and extras. You can finish the game in maybe 20, 30 hours and see the core story like a Metal Gear Solid or Resident Evil. But all the extras in it, if you want to do everything in this game, you're talking 80 plus hours to get like a golden chocobo and to get Knights of the Round and all the best summons to fight the Omega weapon and beat it, to see all the secrets and extras that they layered in there that a lot of people didn't know until about 2 years after the game had been out and people were playing it to death. People were still discovering new secrets the same way back in the day on Super Nintendo. People would find new secrets in Super Mario and Final Fantasy, sometimes years after the game had been out, because that's a very Japanese designed video game ethic to hide these little extras in plain sight that you don't know about and you can't possibly know about until someone tells you about them or you find them by accident. And then you go back and replay. My old mate used to keep saves at multiple points in the game on each disc. So when he read the video game magazine, which was PlayStation magazine, doing the old Nintendo Power, by the way, there was this little secret here, and you can get this special item which lets you do this thing 20 hours later in the game that there's no way you could know about. He'd have a save and go home and right, I'm only 3 hours away from that, load up my save, get that thing, and he'd play all these multiple saves, and eventually he'd get to this perfect game where he did 100%. He did every single possible thing you could do in this game, got every rare item, every rare ability or magic slash materia, fought every impossible extra boss that's in it that you don't have to fight. They have to do all sorts of crazy extras to even access or get to them that are completely aside from the main story. So it's a game that really just like gives. So the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And you can say it's aged not in the best way, but I find it still has a particular charm to it. I like the smoothed graphics in it. They look like Tobal or Tobal 2 from Namco. They don't have a lot of horrible textures and polygon stuff. They're very smooth, and I think that it makes them even a little bit timeless in the battle scenarios, at least, if not the cutscenes.
I think the reason it kind of it and it does kind of polarize people, this game. Like you say, there's some people who think it's like really overrated and
Yeah,
not worth the
based on
time.
things
But
that
I
came
think
afterwards.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that comes to do with, like we were saying earlier, there was so much hype for this, and
Yeah.
Sony were very cagey in how they advertise it. Like if you go back and look at any of
Mhm.
those old Final Fantasy advertisements, everything they show you is action and cutscenes. You nearly wouldn't actually
Yeah,
realize you
that's
were
true.
what type of game you were buying. So I think a lot of
They were
people
pushing the 3D
back
in the
in the day,
ads for sure.
yeah, I think tons of people back in the day picked up the game thinking it was going to be some type of like fighter or like hack and
Yeah,
slash. I don't think they realized that no, you're actually going to have to
yeah. That
spend
it's a
time
Japanese
and exactly.
Japanese RPG all the way. Like, I know an old friend back in New Zealand, a different friend, the other one who introduced me to this, who was not a hardcore gamer. It wasn't even much of a video gamer. I know an old friend who, in the PlayStation era, picked up this game and Tomb Raider and completed both of them, who wasn't even particularly into video games because they were just so heavily marketed. And when they got into them, they fell in love with the story and the characters and what was going on in it.
It says it all.
Mm. Well, we're going to move on to the next one. But before we move on to the next slide, we're going to do a little intermission just here. Okay, we're back again after a brief intermission. Finished talking about existential angst and worldliness and Final Fantasy. Moving on to our next slide here. With this is part of our planned break. We were talking about PlayStation cheats.
Yeah, we're just a couple of cheaters here.
A couple of cheats. It's fun to cheat.
It is fun, especially if it involves like infinite ammo and unlimited health
Yes.
and being able to skip
I
levels.
gave Mark both of those before the stream started. I gave infinite health, rocket launcher, ammo, full God mode.
And it's one of those things though, isn't it? It's we done the very, very first episode we did, we kind of spoke briefly about how it's a completely or an almost completely forgotten kind of way of gaming where you had
Yeah,
all these like cheats and ways to debug games and do
and the
really cool
magazines
stuff.
with the cheats.
Yeah, and like the PlayStation, this first PlayStation, it kind of is the end of an era for that stuff. You just don't
Yeah.
get as much of it, especially from the PS2 onwards. Cheats kind of begin to die out,
Hmm. I used to
and
have
I
a Tekken
suppose
3 whole little soft cover full move list thing because it's such an extensive move list, which wasn't technically a cheat, but just getting the full move list of some fighting games back then was difficult unless you knew people that knew it.
yeah, and it was all there was a lot of word of mouth. There was a lot of
Yeah.
trading of
You know,
magazines
Mortal
and
Kombat secret characters.
exactly. And like if you might be lucky enough to know somebody who knows cheats for your games. You might know cheats for their
Yeah.
games, and you might not even have each other's games. It was just a very strange time, at least when you compare it to nowadays, where it's just not a thing anymore, really. I suppose though, back in the day, you know, these consoles they weren't intended to be connected to the internet, so it's not like you're going to be entering
No.
competitions and you weren't going to be involved in foul play as such because you weren't going to be in like an official competition against somebody. Like it's okay to do cheats if you're just sitting by
If
yourself in
it's
the house
fun,
or like playing
I
with your
want a big
friends.
head
Yeah, they're
mode.
fun.
I want dual wielding and golden magnums.
Exactly. Or I just, maybe I just want to skip straight to the last level and just fight that
Can I just
boss
skip
or
to the end credits? Like just read the text at the end. That's what I like about video games.
yeah. But sometimes, you take I always played a lot of the PlayStation version of Doom. And Doom is one of
Yeah.
those games that just
Do you know about the soundtrack on that version?
no, tell me.
Well, the place. Okay, first of all, Doom fucking rocks on any
Yeah.
version, but don't play the 3DO or the 32X version, both of which I played are terrible. But if you play the normal PC version or modern ports, PS4, Switch, were fucking amazing. Doom 2. I still play them to this day. Brilliant games. Fuck all other first person whatever games. They're not Doom. The soundtrack on the PlayStation/PSX version was an entirely original score. The PC version had like sort of MIDI versions of like Metallica songs. The PlayStation version, entirely original, and it's all eerie as fuck, like the best horror movie sounds, more like your Silent Hill kind of music, and it's
It
all
is different.
original.
It is different. Now that
And
you've said it, I didn't realize that. I don't think I copped it at the time that it was done just
it's
for
its
that
own
that
thing, and it
particular
popped
version
up
of the game.
again in the N64 version, had some of those tracks again, and you can also get PS4, PS5 download of what used to be the N64 version, has the PSX original audio soundtrack in it, and they're all what you would call ambient horror tracks, where it's like weird groans, like horror shit. They're not what you'd call traditional music. None of the Metallica rock metal music is it. It's all ambient horror stuff, and it's probably the best Doom soundtrack they've had in any version of any Doom. Like, I love it so much.
Yeah,
And they
well, it
added
definitely
in
worked for
nightmare
me.
imps and see-through demons.
Yeah, and I know, and of course, though, all the cheats were there as well. So,
That
like, there's nothing like
yes,
going into one of the later levels of Doom already packing like a BFG with infinite ammo, or
yeah.
maybe even putting on the
It's
the double speed cheat, so everything's in rapid fire
yep,
mode.
yep.
It's just
It's
breaks
if
the
you've
game.
played the game to completion, it's more fun to enjoy the cheats after the fact. Like if you're just a kid and terrible at the game, cheats kind of like an equalizer or a trainer mode where you get to actually see more of a game. But if you got some skill when you build up, complete it. It's good to play through it again or do like a speed run with cheats on where you can't die and how fast can I get through the level or which weapon do I want to use with nearly unlimited ammo and zip through it. It just changes it to a whole like arcade experience rather than a slow experience, which is really, really fun.
Yeah, definitely. And it disappointed me when I downloaded the Xbox 360 version of the game because it didn't
Yeah.
do the cheats, not in the traditional way,
Yeah.
and it just kind of because it's like I know the game inside out. I don't want to just
Yeah,
play
like
through
San
every single
Andreas.
bit.
How many extra hours did I play when I was doing a rocket launcher and or Gatling gun in Vice City? I played that game to completion so many times. You give me unlimited rocket launcher, like, or just blowing up cars or doing crazy shit.
Those games were great for cheats, and at
Yeah,
least I think that
yeah.
with
So,
those games, you were encouraged to cheat though, kind of in those games, like because
that's the
they made them
spirit of it.
really
It's like a
available.
modifier that enhances the fun. It's not about like taking away your skill level. It's like enhancing the fun of what you're doing, and you can fuck around. And in San Andreas on PS2, you can spawn about 8 hovercrafts, and if you do, I think number 9, the first one will disappear because it can't hold it in the RAM, and you put the C4 charges on them, then you walk a half a mile up onto the bridge, the overhanging U-shaped bridge, and stand above it and press your button, and it goes boom, 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 boom. There's been chain reaction in a circle of C4 bombs on hovercrafts. You're not going to do that in the normal game without a cheat. Like, and
No,
people took
not at
that to
all.
extreme levels on PC with where they can more RAM, they can spawn vehicles, but doing stuff like that took a lot to set up and was crazy fun. We could go on top of the tallest tower in San Andreas, spawn a truck, drive it off, and just tumble it around like Burnout 3 style. There's many loops as you could get before it hits the ground and you explode in a fiery death.
If you weren't quick enough to jump out and pull your parachute on the way down.
Yeah, get your parachute on. Yeah, do it all over again. Did a lot of that, all that
Uh,
two-player mode with my brother in San Andreas. Oh, we better move on to the next one, which is another Mark pick here. Now, a question for you, Mark, is can you survive the horror?
just about, Johnny. Just about.
Just about. The shotgun's gonna blow your legs
Yeah.
off.
Oh, big time, big time. Man, like I just love this game. Like I absolutely love it to death.
Yeah,
I had
still the best.
oh, it's just so good. It's so good. Like I played this before I actually even played the first game properly. I had watched
Yeah.
other people play the first game and I didn't own a copy of it myself, so I hadn't gotten a proper play of it. So when I
I
got
see my
my hand,
mate play the
but I
first one, but
yeah, same here, same here. And I was more than familiar though with the first game's story, so I knew all the story beats. So
yeah,
I was able to get into
Umbrella.
this one straight away. Umbrella, Umbrella, and this is one of these games that just gets you straight away. It's got
What
an
the fuck is
absolutely
going on?
yeah. the opening scenes are so good. The FMV video sequences, they just suck you
Yeah.
into this game. And
That
so
maniac's
look,
gonna
just
ram
because
us.
I know we're jumping straight in like we usually do. So just to give a wee bit of background, so it's the sequel to the best-selling horror game Resident Evil, and essentially it takes that game out of a confined mansion and plops you right down in the middle of Raccoon City. So you begin the game on the city streets, which are infested with zombies.
Yeah.
You eventually fight your way to the police station, which a large chunk of the game takes place in. And the police station in itself is just like a real house of horrors. Like there were so many
Yeah. A lot of
late nights
statues
I
and
had.
trees. More than my
Oh, the
local cop
place.
shop.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a freaky environment to walk around. And there
Yeah.
was something about how they did those pre-rendered backgrounds in the Resident Evil game.
They
You
were
got to really
beautiful.
kind of, oh, they're beautiful, but there's a real like lived in feeling to the environments. Like when you'd
Mm.
see, kind of dirt on the walls or like
Or
trash on
bits
the
of people's
ground. And
lunch.
yeah, like there were so many little elements of realism added throughout the environments of the game. And there's so many things that could really like get under your skin. Like even just walking into a small confined room with like there was like dimly yellow lit. There's like a half-eaten lunch on the ground beside a corpse with like flies around it. Like there were so many kind of
Yeah. Or
atmospheric
the
moments.
notes.
This,
The notes like
yeah,
itchy, tasty. Like what?
yes, yes, and that's one thing I suppose we should touch on because it's something that's often lost in modern games. Was that you explored the lore, to steal a Jim Largo phrase there, but you
You're the
explored the
law.
lore of the game by reading these notes and these diaries that you'd
Yeah. Like
find
handwritten
scattered
notes.
throughout. And
People had
sometimes,
died.
yeah, but the level of kind of visceral kind of detail and the level of I suppose effort that kind of went in by the developers in putting all this stuff together. Because I used to spend ages literally just reading through the files in the game. Like you'd be reading the diary of the dead security guard or the diary of the scientist who was working on the virus or
Yeah.
whatever. There was always some type of
The diaries are
interesting
great.
take. And it was the type of thing where it kind of enhanced the experience of the horror for you, like when you were reading
Hmm.
these accounts from essentially dead characters, and you kind of would get a feeling then of what was ahead of you. But like so many of the environments in the game were just so brilliant. Like after you leave the police station, you go down into the city sewers. From there, you go to like the Umbrella Laboratory. You're seeing all these like mutations and like freaky plants, naked zombies, which is probably the most terrifying thing ever to
Oh, the
experience.
skinless zombies are
Yeah,
disturbing.
yeah,
Kill the
it's like what the
flamethrower.
hell? And and it's one of those games, and like you mentioned earlier with Final Fantasy, this is a game that's like littered with Easter eggs and littered with
Yes, a lot.
just little hidden gems here and there. Like when you go into the
Extra
STARS office in the
bosses, extra
police station,
scenarios.
even little weird things like some of the offices in the police station, like you go into the STARS office, there's a picture of like Marty McFly and his brother and sister from like Back to the Future, and just loads of these like really weird little things scattered throughout the game. And that's right, you mentioned like hidden boss battles. And depending on how you play through the game, what you do in the first scenario will affect what happens in the second scenario. And
Hmm.
the order in which you decide to do things can change the ending of the game and the overall outcome of the
Yes.
game. And it's one of those things, once again, if you didn't have a magazine or a friend with word of mouth to tell you, you you
Oh,
you
you're in
got some
trouble.
really tough, you got, yeah, you're in trouble. You got some really tough
Didn't
lessons.
have the
Like
Nintendo
I
Power Edge mark.
yeah, I learned a harsh lesson when, like, I'm playing through the first scenario, and I opted to take both the machine gun and the ammo pack and did not leave it for the next
No,
player in the next
leave
scenario. And
it.
then all of a sudden,
Leave everything on the
yeah,
floor and run past it.
yeah, that's it. Just leave it all there for the next guy because you're going to be the next guy and you're going to need it.
If it
So,
if it's on the
uh,
floor, you can pick it up when you have to double back, which you don't know the first time how much you got to fucking double back in this game.
oh yeah. Oh yeah, and even just the whole. Obviously, it was a concept that was introduced in the first game, but carried on to perfection in this game, where you're generally struggling for ammo. You have limited space to carry items. You always have to think, what's ahead of me?
Mhm.
Do I have enough space to carry these herbs? Do I
No,
have enough space? Do I have enough ammo to kill this
just
boss?
smoke them now,
No.
Mark. There's not enough space for those herbs.
Yeah. Smoke them now, feel good, load up the shotgun, and just
Get
get
the
going.
vitality.
But and it's just brilliant, and it's one of those things, and I'll mention it briefly as well, just because it follows on directly. But Resident Evil 3 was almost like an apology for this game, where it's like, look, we know
Apology.
you've suffered. We know you've suffered without
We've got
shooting
some
off
more
any
ammo
of your
for you.
guns. Yeah, here's all the fucking ammo in the world now for Resident Evil 3. Like, as soon as you start off Resident Evil 3, you've got like an assault rifle in your hand, loads of ammo,
Yeah,
and you
it's
can
big
just
as it's
go,
as
go,
big as
go.
Jill.
Exactly, exactly. Because in Resident Evil 2, man, like, if you kind of fucked up enough early on, you could really
You're
really
stuffed.
make it difficult for you to get ahead in the game. Like, and I have to say, like, I learned the hard way. I was always kind of at the beginning just killing every zombie I came across, and
Yeah.
really just struggling my way through. It wasn't until I kind of copped on a bit. It's like, no, 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 start this again. You're going to duck, you're going to dodge, you're going to pick up what you need, and then
Yep.
you're going to get out.
Cool.
Because if you stay and try and fight, you're either going to get killed, or you're just going to use up all your
Yep.
ammo and get killed later on anyway. So you
That's
learn
it.
that the hard way, and it gets to the point where, especially the first time you're playing through the game, like, you're trying to just stock up on as much ammo and equipment as possible, because you
Mhm.
need it for the final boss to actually escape and get out of there. So the whole game is all just like pushing you towards that big escape at the end to see if you really can survive the horror, and just get the fuck out of Raccoon City before the whole thing goes to pot. And it just builds to a really, really tense kind of showdown between you and the final boss, who's like the formed scientist William Birkin. He's totally mutated and messed up. You're having the big kind of fight with him on this like kind of tram elevator thing. Like, there's so much cool creature designs in the game, and kind of horrific looking bosses and stuff. It just kind of hit it. It really hit it for me. It was
Yep.
around the time as well where I was only kind of getting into the zombie genre of things. Like, my older brother had introduced me to like George Romero films. So
Yeah, well,
the idea
these
of
games are very
zombies.
much George Romero style.
Oh, big time, big time. And like, I played this game not long after watching the George Romero Dawn of the Dead for the first time, so it really was
Well,
kind of ingrained
that's
in
what
me,
this
that
is.
kind
You
of
got
fear.
Night, Dawn, Alien, Aliens, Resident Evil 2.
Yeah, that's how it works essentially. And it really left the mark on me. And I know we mentioned Resident Evil 3 there, but I think from what I read before, Resident Evil 3 was actually originally going to be just the third disc of Resident Evil 2, and there was a bit of chopping and changing done, and it ended up being its own
Mhm.
separate release, because a lot of
Yeah.
Resident Evil
I know it
3,
takes
or at least a
place at the
good
same
chunk of it.
time.
That's right, that's right. And I think it was originally just supposed to be like an extra scenario disc. The way
Mhm.
I have the hand here, so I still have my original PS1 Resident Evil 2 box, but it's for those of you who don't own the game, it was a double disc game. So you had your
Yeah.
Leon scenario and your Claire scenario.
And
I
you
think
had
the
and
original
explain the scenario
intention was to have
business
a
for
third
people that
disc.
don't know.
So the way it works, so the scenario business is, when the game starts off, you're shown a cutscene, and in that cutscene, the two main game characters are split apart from each other. So Leon goes one path and Claire
Damn
goes
explosion.
another path. By yeah, they're separated from each other by a big explosion at the start. So you, as the player, depending on which character you pick, you play through what's called the first scenario. So in the first
Yeah, A
scenario,
and B.
you know or scenario A, scenario B. So things that you do in the first scenario as one player can affect what happens when you put in the second disc and play through the second scenario as the other player. So, like we mentioned earlier, you might see a gun and some ammo in the first scenario that you decide to take with you. But if you had decided to leave that behind, then your player in the second scenario would have actually came across that gun and ammo. And there are
Yes.
points throughout the game where actions and things that you do in the first scenario will also affect what happens to you in the second scenario. So it adds another layer of, I suppose, thinking that you as a player kind of have to negotiate. It's like, do I take the submachine gun now and make my life easier in this very moment, or do I leave the submachine gun for the next player for scenario B? And like I was saying earlier, I was kind of greedy and took the gun the first time, only to learn the hard way the second time that I really fucking needed that gun.
Yeah, the scenario thing was an amazing game mechanic because you took a game that the first time through, it's going to take you about 10 hours because you don't know what the fuck you're doing or where the keys are, the weapons, you're dying all the time. If you know what to do in the game, you can probably finish it 5 to 6 hours if you're not backtracking too much. You remember where the keys are, which to this day I still can't. I have terrible memory for picking up items. The scenarios make it so you have not one, not two, not three, but 4 times you will complete this game. You think, man, what a bloody chore for a modern gamer, and you got other shit to do in your life. But it made for 4 unique scenarios where it was different. There's different dialogue, there's different boss battles in each scenario, different placement of the items and weapons, if you said. To complete this game truly once, you complete it 4 times, which is making it into RPG territory of 20 to 30 hours to actually properly play through and see everything that's in there. And then once you have, you find out there's extra hidden shit you never even knew about, which they
That's
also
right.
release to make it more accessible in the DualShock version, where a lot of the secret extras where you've got to play through and meet all sorts of specific criteria, like don't pick this up or don't use this item or hit this thing or whatever. In the DualShock version, which was your twin analog sticks on the PlayStation. It was a new control. That's why they call it that version. So you didn't have to use the D-pad anymore and get blisters on your thumbs. You could use the analog stick. Still the tank controls, push up to move, but it was easy on your thumbs. But there was extra modes in this you could unlock from the start. The hunk, which was like a special forces soldier guy, a little scenario you could play through in an hour or two. Tofu was a gag, literally a big chunk of tofu that only has a knife and no guns and just dies easily. And you play through a scenario with him. But you could play through a kind of speed run battle mode with unlimited rocket launcher or chain gun that were fairly difficult to unlock in the original game with all the special criteria. You could get it for free on this version, and you could speed run the game, just chain gunning or rocket launching every single enemy of the game all the way to the end. That was a heck of a lot of fun, and like made for like a different, kind of arcade gameplay again instead of the survival horror gameplay we always conserving ammo. But yeah, the
Yeah.
extra version of this was really cool, and all the extra modes they threw in just gave you so much more gameplay value for your dollar.
Yeah, I really wish this had landed over on this side of the pond because I only ever
Yeah,
read
we
about
had the
this
bootleg
version in the
version.
magazines. Yeah, I probably should have looked harder for a bootleg myself because I read
Yeah,
about it. I used to buy an American PlayStation magazine, and it had a big kind of article about this version at the time. I had
yeah. It was a
tried,
definitive
and
version for what they did.
oh, definitely, definitely, because I think, if I remember correctly now, I could be misremembering this, but on the original version of Resident Evil 2, I think in order to unlock Hunk, you had to play on normal difficulty and complete the game in under like 3.5 hours or something like that,
Yeah, it
which
was
was a
really
pretty,
strict criteria.
yeah, it was quite hard, like, and but
It's like trying to
thankfully
get S
later
rank
on.
for Devil May Cry.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. But like thanks to the cheat cartridges and our cheat or modded PlayStations, later on I was
Yeah,
able to just do the thing to have essentially have that dual shock version of Resident Evil myself.
yeah.
Just I used the cheat cartridge instead to unlock everything from the
Mhm,
start. So it
mhm.
definitely made life
That's the
easier
way.
in that respect.
Yeah, like
Had to be
my mate
done.
who got me into Final Fantasy VII King of Fighters was also the same friend who got me into Resident Evil 2. And he used to keep multiple save files on 2 memory cards so he could, as he's learning stuff from the magazines and other people about the hunk and the tofu and other things like that.
You know what? I suppose now that you've mentioned it, it's probably something we've mentioned it now a couple of times, but memory cards. Memory cards were like life back
I
in the
don't
day.
remember.
Be- Because
I could do with
because
lunch.
if you didn't have enough free blocks on your memory card, then you
Oh, you
couldn't
were
save
fucked.
the game, and then you had to make the choice.
If you
Well,
bought a
I'm gonna have
third
to
party
delete
one that
something.
corrupted and you were
Oh
30 hours
yeah,
into Final Fantasy VII twice, don't do it.
yeah, it's not worth it. Always remember, folks. Any folks who are listening to us in the
Only
past
buy
right now,
official
if you're listening,
PlayStation memory cards.
if you're listening to us from the year '97 right now, cut down the third-party memory cards and go buy
Yeah,
your official
they
Sony
all fuck
PlayStation
up.
memory card. They do.
I can
They
pick
all
up
fuck
an
up
old PS1
eventually.
memory card, it'll still work now, the flash memory, but the third party one's fucked up inside of 12 months every time. Okay,
But memory
move
cards
on
were a
to the.
lifesaver, and they're important.
Yeah. And you didn't really know back then that you even needed one. You'd buy a game and think, "Oh, we need to get this extra bloody thing," and yeah, but we learned the hard way. I'll move on to the
We do.
next one, which is a certain Lara Croft in Tomb Raider, the original game. This game was amazing. I remember Mario 64 on Nintendo 64 was this big, amazing platform game with like massive levels. And you think, what do you mean platform game? Tomb Raider, you're climbing, you're shooting exotic animals for no good reason. Well, they're both essentially platform games. You're running around in large 3D environments, and it's quite experimental as far as the graphics of the time, the environments, the gameplay mechanics. There's a lot of cheap deaths and bad perspectives and dodgy camera angles, but this Tomb Raider and Mario 64, the real enemy wasn't the bad guys or the exotic animal. It was a fucking camera spinning around and messing you up, and you fell down a pit to your death. But you got used to it, and you learned how to manipulate and make it go how you press the button to go reset to this position where I bloody want you, stupid camera. So they were fighting with early 3D, fighting with early cameras, but despite the technical limitations and the dodgy pixelated textures, it was an amazing game with expansive levels, had all sorts of cool hieroglyphs in Egypt and other ancient environments, and just but it's all about exploration. It's not, you can call it exploration slash action, but it can take hours to get through some of the levels when you don't know what you're doing. But once you figure it out, you might breeze through it in 30 minutes. But the later levels get really intricate with massive jumps and the save points. You can't save where you want to. You can only save when there's a save crystal at a certain point, and it takes 45 minutes to get to the bloody save crystal in later levels. Then you die and have to get all the way back to it. Just just an incredible game with like a great, well designed character who was played up as being a bit of a tart in a lot of the magazines and media, the Lucasade ads, and the stupid CG art. But in the game, she was just a female Indiana Jones, and she was a cool character. And she wasn't played up as being a moron or a bimbo. She was an intelligent, cultured person who traveled the world and, I don't know, stole some treasures she probably should put in a museum and not keep for herself. But great character.
It belongs in a museum. Yeah, a fantastic, fantastic character, and just a fantastic game. And I have to say, I obviously played Tomb Raider 2 and Tomb Raider 3 as well afterwards, but
Yeah, same.
I always went back to the first Tomb Raider, and
Mhm.
it's just always had a real special place in my heart as well. Especially, I think it's very early in the game. It might even be like the second or third level where there's like a kind of an underground jungle with dinosaurs. There's like a big T-Rex and a couple of raptors.
Yeah, and he
I must
comes
have played.
barreling out of nowhere at you.
Oh man, I loved the first time I came across that. It blew my mind, and I must have went back and replayed that level so many times just to. And it's like you're
Yes.
saying, like you could
It's a
you could
great
walk
level.
around for hours even after you know the game inside out. I used to just go back and walk around levels and just kind of soak in the environments because it was a really great game just for, like you said, like the visual of it. Like you're looking at all these kind of like
And the atmosphere.
hieroglyphics on walls and like you're going through these runes and stuff like that. It was a pretty violent at times as well. Like when you actually do have to finally
Yeah.
deal with enemies, like there's plenty of blood. Like when
To
you're
break
shooting
your
animals and
neck and
shooting
thrash you
people.
around.
Oh man, and that the final kind of big blubber boss thing at the end is pretty horrific looking as well, and you're like
Yeah, some
blowing the
kinda
pits out of
there's the
him.
weird mutants and the archangel thing, and it gets very strange at the end, like the Atlanteans and all that.
Definitely. There's a lot of genre mixing going on. But yeah, look, it's
Yeah,
essentially it's the Indiana Jones game we always wanted, really.
yeah,
And
it mixes, like, archaeology and religious stuff, wild animals, and hot aristocratic English babes running around. Cave
and
girls.
Lara
There you go.
Croft, Laura's very different in the first game than how she's presented in all the
Yeah,
other ones, 'cause they really sexed her up big time for the sequels. But in the first
yeah,
game, yeah, look,
and that was the
it's a
media more than
fairly
the
kinda
games.
exactly, exactly. Like in the first game, she's just kinda yeah, like obviously she's hot to trot, but she's also very capable and able to like handle herself. Whereas I think for the
Yeah,
especially for the advertising around the sequels, it was all just like, look at her boob, she's a
yeah,
woman.
the ads were crazy.
Oh, it was Laura Croft fever for a while. That like she was
Yeah.
everywhere.
Well, she took
You've
over
hit
from
it big
Crash, became
time.
the new icon.
Oh yeah, like there was lads, teenage guys with like big posters of, you know, a sultry looking Laura Croft on their wall. Like she became like a pinup, even though she was a
Fairly
computer
horrible looking
animated
polygons
character.
back then.
Exactly, yeah, and especially, yeah, like, I know you kinda see a kinda nice looking, kind of smoothed out version of her on the cover and that, but in the game, she's just like a blocky kind
Yeah,
of, you know, she's like a
just
stick
blocky.
insect, you know?
She literally had triangle breasts for anyone that doesn't know.
Yeah, she'd kill you with those things.
Yeah, have your eyes out. But yeah, I played through to completion Tomb Raider on PlayStation, but the first version I owned was actually the original version of the game on Sega Saturn, which was not known as a system for doing good 3D. The system was great at doing 2D, like X-Men versus Street Fighter and other games. I played through it to completion on that, and later on got to play it on PlayStation. It was even more pixelated on Sega Saturn, but it's interesting that it was originally on that format. I don't know why. I guess they just timeline wise they started on that format. I think it must have always been a multi-format game because there's no way it can't have been just for that because they moved it over to MS DOS for the PC, like that retro blasting video where he talks about playing it in a tiny, tiny window with a bad frame rate, and it moved over to play. The PlayStation was easily the best version because it ran at the best speed. You could do the saves. You had the memory card. Like the Sega Saturn had an internal bloody battery. Not everyone had a memory card, so you'd lose your bloody save game and all that. And she
Yeah, the
became like
Saturn,
such an icon. She's in so many magazines.
the Saturn got a few firsts, didn't it? Because I remember they had the first Tomb
Yeah.
Raider, they had the first Resident Evil, but then once they started to lose the war,
Mhm.
all of the sequels just seemed to go to PlayStation, and
Yeah,
Saturn
and she
didn't
became a
really get
PlayStation
any.
icon.
Yes. Yeah, Saturn, it's still kinda almost hard to imagine that time when there was that brief competition at the very beginning between
Yeah.
Saturn and PlayStation. And I'm telling you, like we both mentioned earlier, we were Sega kids. I very nearly
I
went
only
with
sold
the
my
Saturn
Saturn 2 years
over
ago.
the PlayStation. Wow, wow. I hope you got a good deal for it because 'cause they're pretty hard to come by
No,
these
I
days.
virtually gave it away. I wasn't playing it. Someone
Okay.
got a deal a bloody lifetime. I'll tell you what,
'Cause,
my one, see that sticker on the Saturn? That's the Aussie one. That's actually a kangaroo and emu from the Australian flags or
oh,
iconography. I had the New Zealand version, same rating, M15, had the exact same sticker, but the Kiwi version up the top of that cover on the Saturn.
yeah, I think, I was very close to getting a Sega Saturn. If it wasn't for the fact that a few of my friends already had the
Yeah.
PlayStation, I probably would have just
Mm,
gotten the Sega Saturn out of like brand loyalty more so than anything
yeah.
else.
I never got the RAM cart for the Saturn, so I had a bootleg version. I had all original games, but then I had a bootleg version, X-Men versus Street Fighter and some later King of Fighters. You had to have the 4 megabit RAM expansion cart, but I could never get a hold of it, so I couldn't play these other games I'd picked up. But
Yeah, from what my
moving on to the ne yeah.
Yeah, I was
Yep.
just gonna say from what my understanding, and bear in mind I'm not like a game designer or developer or anything, but my
Oh,
understanding
I thought
was
you
it was
were.
just it was a lot more difficult to develop games for the Sega Saturn
Oh,
than it was for the
absolutely. It had
PlayStation.
like the N64, it had dual processors, so you had dual chipsets, and it was an absolute bastard to program for. Like, I read a lot of articles over the years, like Retro Gamer and other magazines, that really got into like the BIOS and the chipset and other boring stuff. I'm not a technical person unless someone really explains. I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Um, but yeah, apparently it was a bastard to program for. Wasn't good at doing 3D. They had a really excellent version of Quake from PC, and I didn't know until years later they had to completely rebuild that game in an entirely separate engine. Nothing about it is the original Quake because it would not work or be ported to the Saturn, which is why the Doom on Saturn is absolutely terrible, despite being an early 90s PC game that's mostly TD with a false 3D perspective. Terrible game on Saturn because it doesn't run well and the RAM and everything just chugs. But the PlayStation version is awesome. Good
Yeah.
2D machine, bad 3D machine. That's the short version. Okay, we'll move on to an awesome 3D game. Mark's next pick. This is
Oh yeah.
Tekken 2.
Tekken 2, my first introduction into the Tekken games. I had seen the first one on the shelves, but I had never picked it up. I know it was like one of the launch games with the PlayStation, but I had
It
never
was in
gotten
a lot of
around to playing it.
displays and stores. That's how I played it. They actually had it on a big stereo Sony system with big comfortable chairs, and you could go in and play it in like a hardware kind of store with furniture and all that.
Yeah, I was on holidays with my parents in the west of Ireland, and I was just kind of wandering around. I had the PlayStation back home, and I saw Tekken 2. It was like on offer in a CD shop, so I convinced my parents to buy it for me. But then we were on holidays for like another few more days, so the whole time I was just dying to get home to play it. And when I did get
Got to go
home and I
home.
started playing it, yeah, that's all I did. I just want to go home and play the game. But it
Like,
just
fuck
blew
this
my
holiday.
mind. It totally blew my mind. This game, like the opening
Me too.
cutscene alone, it's so good. I
The
still actually will watch
presentation
it
of it
now and
was the
again.
planet.
Unbelievable. The character models are unbelievable for the time. The graphics of the actual like stage settings with the kind of I suppose there's like some pre-rendered backgrounds mixed in with like a kind of
Mhm.
3D moving kind of plane, but
Yeah,
the
it has
music,
what they later used in Soul Calibur and Soul Edge, where it has a 3D background, and I'm not talking about the graphic. I'm talking about the plane of movement. You can move in a
yes,
circle every time you sidestep completely around the scenery, and like that was a really innovative thing they used in Soul Calibur, later on in Virtua Fighter and other games.
yeah, it's unbelievable. And the mechanics of the game blew my mind because on the surface, it's a real easy to pick up and play type game. Even if you're just a
Mhm.
bit of a novice button basher, you can actually do quite well in Tekken. But where Tekken really rewards you is if you take the time to pick a character and really get into their move set, and
Yeah,
it opens up
combos and
so much
juggles.
more. Exactly. Once you get those combos going, and once you kind of learn a few of those special moves, like you are flying, and it becomes such an addictive process with Tekken 2
Mhm.
especially. For me, it's like pick a character, learn their moves, play with that character from the whole way through to complete arcade mode to unlock their ending, and rinse and repeat that for like whatever amount. There's like
And
20 something characters in the game, so you complete the
all the
game so
extras and
many
the video
times,
bits.
and you're rewarded every time with a great kind of movie cutscene, and
Yeah, they're
it was
hilarious,
just
some of them,
perfect. Oh, some of them were
like
brilliant, like,
Alex and
Roger
Roger.
and Alex, and yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
ridiculous ones. And then some of them were really kind of like hardcore. Like I remember like Armor King's ending, he essentially dies on his way to wrestle a wrestling match,
Yeah.
or
I didn't know.
there's
I
some
was
pretty kind of
watching a Tekken lore thing on YouTube the other day, up to the second or third king, which is actually straight out of the Tiger Mask manga comics, where the original character dies and someone else picks up and takes up the mantle and all that.
Yeah, a lot of wrestling kind of heritage influence
Mm,
there for King and Army King, and just in general, it's got a really good storyline as well. So after I
yeah,
got
it's a
really
good
into
story.
Tekken 2, I played it to absolute death, completed it like a million times till I unlocked everything. Then I went and borrowed the first game off my friend, did the
Oh,
same
it
with
would have
it.
been seemed
Really
clunky
just
going backwards.
it was clunky going backwards, and it really kind of bothered me that they didn't have endings for all the characters in the first game. They
Yeah.
had endings for all the main
The
characters, but
music
they
was
didn't have endings
fantastic,
for
though.
any of them. The music was fantastic, and it had a brilliant intro as well, just like Tekken 2. But like Tekken
Mm,
2, when I watched the opening intro to Tekken 2, I still get goosebumps on my arms. The whole presentation, the music, everything is
yeah.
fantastic. And even when you go to that menu screen with the press
The wind
start
poses.
menu, and it's just like yeah, and like Heihachi's silhouette and all that, it's such a game,
It's
and it began like a fandom with me and Tekken that lasted right up until I think
like
Tekken 6 was when I finally kind of
yeah.
bowed out. I just I'd taken it as far as I go, but Tekken 2, like, and don't get me wrong, I know there's another game that comes after Tekken 2 called Tekken 3, which is also an
No,
excellent,
it doesn't
excellent
exist.
game. It was Tekken 2 that really just grabbed me and pulled me
It's the
in because
linchpin of the series.
oh, big time. And up until that, I was kind of like a staunch, I was still very much stuck in the 2D world of like Street Fighter and
Yeah,
Mortal
2D.
Kombat. It really kind of broke me into the 3D field of playing. And then like from Tekken, I kind of spun off into stuff like Soul Blade, Soul Calibur, Tobal Number One. There was a few other kind of
Yeah,
3D fighters that all kind of landed around that same era. But if it wasn't for Tekken 2 kind of breaking me in, like I
or
never would have gotten
Shinden.
to experience that. Oh yeah, yeah, and like yeah, Battle Arena cheating, all that stuff. It's just great games. Like that's one thing about the first PlayStation. If you liked racing games and if you liked fighting games, you were in your element because they
Yeah,
just
for sure.
bunged them out. And
Yeah,
it's
like the
serendipitous that you got the platinum cover of this as well because it was the platinum version of the game
mhm.
that I owned.
Yeah, I just found the best resolution I could of whatever I tried to get PAL where possible because 'cause we're both in PAL territories, but
We're a right pair of pals.
we're good old pals. We moved 20% slower than everyone else in the world. Sorry, people. The
You
Tekken
know
2
what's
was
really
amazing, like,
interesting?
yeah,
It's just that it's only I'm just looking here. So yeah, so one block on your
yeah,
memory card, which is a pretty that's like what you want for your pretty standard game. Whereas earlier on when you were
yeah.
looking at the Final Fantasy and Metal Gear Solid
Oh, too
slides, I
many.
think like the Metal Gear Solid's like 15 blocks of space or something. It's
Psycho
crazy amount of
Mantis was
space.
taking all your blocks.
Yeah.
He was throwing them in the trash.
Yeah, we like our one block saves here. We like to
Yeah.
conserve our 1 megabyte of
Yeah,
save space.
that's what's called good programming, and actually, it's the hallmark of Namco of the PlayStation era is they did amazing games with limited RAM, good save files, and amazingly, even on the very first Tekken, amazingly fast loading speeds between rounds and into the next fighter. Whereas if you played like King of Fighters on PlayStation, it took for fucking ever to load between the next fight and round. Same with most of the Street Fighters because it would be in real time on Super Nintendo. But when you got to the CD-ROM format, it was loading and accessing a different thing. Namco were masters at making the PlayStation run smoothly, fast. Tekken 2, Tekken 3, just did amazing things that like it showed you that they were just very smart programmers the way they developed these games.
Yeah, they're definitely the masters of taking a an arcade hit and
Yes,
downgrading
reducing
it
it
and
somewhat,
stripping it down, reducing it, and still great. It's still great.
but it
You
still
don't
felt
feel
epic
like
and amazing when you played at home.
yeah, you don't lose the
I want
essence of the game.
like Jack 2 and P Jack and Gun Jack and all those guys, like they were awesome.
So many great characters, so many great endings
Yeah.
for each of the characters. It just felt like every
The endings and
character
the videos were
had a bit of
awesome.
story. Oh, it made the game. It made the game, and the
Mhm.
soundtrack is fantastic. It's just a real
Yeah,
masterpiece
soundtrack's
of a game.
great. I keep the soundtrack to listen to on my iPod or on the computer when I'm writing articles and that. And Tekken 2, Tekken 3, the first Tekken's good soundtrack as well. They're all worth listening to.
Definitely.
Speaking of which, the only way you can follow up Tekken 2 with Johnny Piquet, Tekken 3. And this was an amazing conversion because, again, I had a friend who was playing Final Fantasy, he was playing King of Fighters. His brother was the guy that played Tekken 3 in the arcade and at home. And he played so much Tekken 3, he played it every day, every weekend for over 2 years. And every time I was at the bloody house, he'd shove the control in my hand and go, fight me on this, because he just wanted practice. So when he went to the arcades, he could beat more people up. And he would practice every single character, every combo, every 10-hit string, every kind of weird juggle and cheat thing you could do with Jin, where he'd do a high punch and a weird sweeping kick, and you could do a half infinite juggle and other bullshit in this game. He played it non-stop, and it was an amazing game, and I love it to this day. But there was a period where I got absolutely sick of it because he was playing it for 2 years and would force me to play him on two players, and he was fantastic at it and beating most guys in the arcade and tournaments. And I got so damn sick of it. I'm like, shut up, stop going on about fucking Tigger. But like,
You were
fantastic game, like, and the
overexposed.
conversion of it, it was just so incredible. And they added in Gone from the manga comics, they added in Doctor B, they added in the FMV endings that aren't in the arcade. Just amazing game.
And this game really rewarded you if you had been lucky enough to have Tekken 1 and 2, because on
Yeah.
the disc for this, you got theater mode. So if you had your
Oh
disc from
yes, I forgot
Tekken
about
2
that.
and Tekken 1, you could turn on theater mode in Tekken 3 and then pop open the tray and pop in your Tekken 2 or Tekken 1 disc and watch all
Yes,
the movies
true.
off those games.
That was a
A
cool feature,
phenomenal,
and they had like a
phenomenal
fighting
feature.
game, side-scrolling fighting game mode in it too.
That's right. I think it's called Tekken Force, I believe,
Yeah,
and
which became a
it
series, and
was
later on they had Tekken
it became a
Bowl and all
series,
that.
yeah, and it was never as good as it appeared on this Tekken 3 incarnation. I think
No,
this Tekken 3 version was just simple enough and enjoyable enough that it worked, and then
yeah,
they
the
tried to
later
make
ones
it
were no
into
kind of
too much.
nonsense.
But it's a great game, man. And as much as I praise Tekken 2, and I suppose Tekken 2 will always be a little bit higher up the chain for me because it was my introduction. But if I was being
Yeah.
completely honest, like Tekken 3 really does improve on Tekken 2 in so many ways.
Real
Like it really
technical
cleans up.
powerhouse, the speed it plays at, the combos, the soundtrack. The soundtrack kicks ass, man. Like, it's the full soundtrack you never hear in the game because it always cuts off before the end of the round. But if you listen to it, it's got like dubstep, it's got speed metal, it's got hard rock, it's got pop, and it's got all kinds of stuff in there, and J-pop, and amazing soundtrack.
And a very deep control system as well. Like they built really
Yeah.
well on the
Tim's
mechanics that
multiple throws.
Tekken 2. Oh, unbelievable. And even like Harang being able to switch stances and all
Yeah,
that.
the
Like it was such
stances
a
bouncing back and forth with the
and it's another one of those things, somebody who isn't that good at the game or is new to that type of game, they
you can
could pick
still
up the
button
game
mash and
and just
enjoy it.
they're still button bashing, but if you know your shit, you are going to be rewarded.
Yeah, you're gonna get owned if like if you play against someone
Once
who's a really good player.
once someone starts switching stances with a rang or
Yeah,
gets you in an infinite juggle with
yeah,
Eddie's kicks, like you're just
yeah,
dead.
yeah. I like one of the tricks my old mate used to do is like if you had a character like Law, his speed was just a bit more than the other character. At the very beginning round, he'd just go and just do that like lightning punch, like a real Bruce Lee. Before you're like, what the fuck just happened? He'd punch you before you could move. And then you'd go to move or do something else, and it'd cancel the next animation frame by doing another punch or another move. And if you're good at the game, you could learn little tricks like that, little like one frame hits and counter hits and shit. It's an amazing game and very technical when you get into the advanced levels of it and what you can do in it. We'll move on to the next one, which is a Mark pick. We've got Ridge Racer, which was an arcade game later
Ridge
ported to the
Racer.
PlayStation.
Yeah,
Ridge
and
Racer.
And another great example of I suppose Namco taking a stripped down version of an arcade classic and making it into a classic PlayStation game. And this was actually one of the original launch games for the console.
Yeah, I remember it.
And
Same store had Tekken and Ridge Race on a big display with stereo speakers and seats.
it blew my mind, man. I'm telling you. I remember I think it might have been Christmas maybe of '96. My mates got the PlayStation before I did.
Mhm.
And I remember walking into their house a few days after Christmas, and one of them was playing Ridge Racer on the kind of the main family TV, and he was just literally, I could hear like the techno music pumping. He had just driven
Yeah,
under,
it's
like
like
he was in a
Daytona on
tunnel, and all the
steroids.
lights are. Oh man, it just blew my mind. And like you could have told me that it was literally a clone of the arcade game, because I had remembered seeing the
Yeah,
arcade game like from
great
time to
conversion.
time. It was unbelievable. And it's one of those games, like I know somebody, I can easily see how somebody would play it now and be like, oh, well, this is really blocky and clunky and what's the big deal? But I'm telling you, back in
It was
like
so fast,
94,
man. It's
95,
slick.
oh, it was so good. So slick. And the music, like that techno high speed, just dung, dung,
Yeah.
dung. All the tracks were
Piss
just
off
like
Sega
push,
Rally
push,
and
push.
Daytona with your terrible soundtracks.
And like the Tekken games, I guess it must be a bit of a Namco trait. It was one of those things where on
Mhm.
its surface you might think there's not much to the game, but the more you kind of put in and the more time you invest, like you'll unlock reverse tracks or you'll unlock special
Yeah.
cars,
It's a real
and things
trait
like
with
that.
that company.
Yeah, it added a lot of depth. And you know they did a bunch of sequels, like there was Ridge Racer Revolutions, Rage Racer, Ridge Racer 4. I played them all because they were always that easy to pick up and play arcade
Yeah, I played
experience with
R4 a
just
fair
enough.
bit.
Yeah, yeah. R4 was a good game. I know it's a bit it's kind of like the last real Ridge Racer game, R4, because
Yeah.
after that I they just never, the series was never really the
No.
same. And I think as
And what's
well, by the
what's up with
time
the
Ridge
names
Racer,
on the side of those cars there?
yeah, well, like Starblade, like these are all Namco properties essentially, aren't they? That they've
Yeah, that's
because
another trait. Like Gallagher used to play at the start of the original Tekken.
and I'm pretty sure on even on this track that they show on the cover, you'll actually see posters for like Tekken 2 and different games that were in
Yes.
development at the time
And
from Namco.
in some of the later games, you could have like Klonoa, who was a platform game. You could custom your car and put decos and stickers and stuff on, like your Gran Turismo and Forza and all that. But years before that, that would have decos from Maffei and Klonoa you could put onto your cars in the later games. It was very cool.
You just sparked a member berry in me there, because I'd totally forgotten about Klonoa, and now I'm gonna probably go down because
Yeah.
it's another good platformer. It was very
I've played a
enjoyable.
lot of Klonoa over the years. I've got the re-release on Switch of the first and second games where they're fully 3D.
Yeah, I know it's a brilliant game. It's a brilliant game. But even, yeah, back to Ridge Racer. I think what ultimately maybe doomed the Ridge Racer franchise in the end was
Mhm.
the kind of emergence of realistic branded racing
Yeah.
games. So you had games like Gran
And even other
Turismo.
ones like your Gotham and what's the bloody ones that the Rockstar do? The Midnight Club. There was a for a while there was a
Yes, yeah,
glut of realistic and arcade races and everything between. It became very crowded.
it did, and there was so much competition. Like, and Gran Turismo was a big one. Hoka Touring Cars was a
Yeah.
big one. Even stuff like Sega Rally and other kind of. There was
Yeah.
just all of a sudden it got very crowded in the kind of
Mhm.
racing genre. And I think Ridge Racer kind of then became like a almost like the Stone Age type of version. Like it
Yeah.
originally was a trendsetter, but by the time the console was kind of finishing up, it had kind of been surpassed. Like games like Need for Speed, Gran Turismo, they just were, I suppose, very visually impressive looking, and it made the Ridge Racer
Mhm.
games somewhat cartoony in comparison. But like for me personally, I actually always kind of preferred the arcadey, cartoony look. I just
I
kind of
like the
like that
arcade ones.
that
Your
vibe.
Sega Rally, your Virtual Racing, your Ridge Racer.
Great times though, great times, and just such a fun game. Like obviously you're not going to be exploring any intricate storylines or characters because it's just a racing game. But for a fun racing game, it's nearly better than it should be. Like it's really just such a little gem of a game and a great choice as a launch game for the console.
But I need an RPG of the guy who changes the tires in between laps and like what was his problems in life. Like that's the lore I need to know. No, I don't. So we'll move on. We're going on to the next game. We have Silent Hill, the original Silent Hill.
And some might say the best Silent
The
Hill.
best, the
Some maybe
original,
me,
and the best.
maybe. I know. There's a few people who really love the sequels more so, but
The second
yeah.
one was
So
amazing, but it only built on what the first one did. I still think the first one is the best in terms of story and what it did and the impact, and everything else has come after has been like a cover version of that game.
pretty much, and this is one of those games where I thought I knew what I was getting into. It's like, oh, I've played Resident Evil.
Oh,
This
you
just
thought
looks
you
like
knew,
the
did
rest.
you?
Oh, I thought I knew. I thought I was like, oh, look, I'm just.
Thought you knew. Relatively well.
It's just another one of these survival horror games, you know.
Yeah,
I've
just
played
go
this
around
type of
bashing
game
things with
before.
a crowbar and you'll be all right. Stick a fork in it, it's done.
And I think though you hit the nail on the head, or you hit the crowbar on the head of the small
Yeah,
creature. But I think that was a big part in the atmosphere of the Silent Hill was the amount of hand to hand or like bludgeon weapon based combat as opposed to
the
relying on
dread.
firearms. Because like Resident Evil, you had very limited ammunition, but even more
You
so
had
than Resident Evil. Like
cockeyed
you
guns that didn't hit things.
exactly, and you were really dependent on your iron bar or your crowbar or
I
your
use
hammer
that
or
that
whatever.
bar a lot.
I remember at one point later on in the game you get like a drill, and it was the most I felt
Yeah,
invincible for a while. Just because I
yeah.
actually had it felt
You
like I
get
had an
those
automatic weapon.
mutant insect cockroaches in the sewers.
But so for those folks who don't know, and look, I'm not even gonna be able to fully explain the story of Silent Hill because even to
No.
this day I'm not even
There's
sure if
there's
I
2
really
hour
fully
videos that don't
understand.
fully explain Silent Hill.
But all you folks really need to know is the basic premise of the game is that you're a guy traveling into this town with his kid. There's a car accident at the start of the game, and you get separated from the child. Child is missing, and you, as the main character, have to run around this
Yes.
seemingly abandoned town in
It's
search
the
of your
drive,
child.
the
And
move.
yeah. So and like straight from the get go, you're just not in Kansas anymore, and it's not going to be like your
No.
typical Resident Evil tank game because the camera follows you when you move, and it gives you this kind
Mm.
of real eerie presence, like there's always somebody watching over your shoulder.
And it gives you
And
dodgy
the way,
controls that are purposely not terribly accurate to make it more difficult on purpose.
oh, definitely, and even just the level design, the actual overall game design, there's a fog or a mist that coats everything, so you can
Yeah,
never
the
see that
mist.
far ahead of you, and it always feels like
Nope.
you're venturing into uncharted waters. You just don't know what's ahead of you. And it's a game that really plays on your senses because you're always listening for footsteps or listening for the sounds of like wings flapping in case some like winged enemy is going to swoop down and get you. And it's just such a freaky atmosphere in the game. And as you progress through the game, especially the first time, you're getting more and more confused as to what's going on. You really
Yep.
don't know,
Very
are you
confusing.
is it like a supernatural horror situation? Is it a science fiction horror situation?
You
Because there are
don't
like
know.
depending on what way you play the game. I'm pretty sure on like my first playthrough of the game, I was under the impression that it had something to do with aliens because I found like pictures of like flying saucers in a hospital and stuff,
Yeah,
and I
that's one of
thought
the
that that
secret
was going to.
endings. That's like the fifth ending.
And it's like I was like so, and I don't. But it's just it mind fucks you the game. You really don't know
Yeah.
what's going on the first couple of playthroughs, but what it really excels at is building tension because usually by the time you encounter an enemy, you're so kind of flummoxed and already kind of upset and annoyed that the enemy nearly always
Yep.
gets the better of you because you're
Yeah.
you're already kind of running around like a headless chicken. So say for example, when you're in that abandoned hospital and you first see like a headless nurse coming at you, like swinging a knife, like your mind is totally
Oh,
like
no.
blown, and the boss battles are all very unique.
Where are
The
their
fighting is
faces?
just, yeah, it's just a lot of the visuals in the game are just really, really freaky. And I think I might even mention to you on our very first episode when we strayed into to talking about
Yeah,
games. There was a bit in the game that kind of made me just hit pause. It's like towards the end, you're like in an amusement park. The cop you met earlier in the game is like coming
and the
after you on a
merry-go-round's going
wheelchair.
round and
Yeah,
round.
yeah. The merry-go-rounds go round. She's on a wheelchair. The whole thing is just like just so
What the
freaky. I
fuck?
remember I remember it got so intense for me. I was playing it like really late one night. I just had to hit pause and like walk out of the room. It's like
It was
I had to like,
walking earlier. It's like, why the fuck she's in that wheelchair?
yeah, I had to like build myself back up to go back, sit back in the chair, and just like finish the
Yeah,
game. And
and all the
with Silent
industrial
Hill,
noises going on, the clanking of metal, the Nine-Inch Nails sounds like
oh,
fucking
it's so
static
good.
and
And
shit, and there's like a static radio sound that plays whenever, demonic enemies are near, but they're just always near, so it's always fucking playing static.
yeah, you're just constantly on edge. And it's not like
Yes.
Resident Evil games where in the Resident Evil games
Boom,
it
shotgun,
was,
you're fucked, zombie.
yeah, exactly. And it was also kind of, you could almost telegraph sometimes when a scare was about to happen, or
Yeah, dogs through
it
the
was
windows.
easier. Exactly, and it was easier for you maybe to judge your environment. Like once you got used to the camera angles, you kind of knew, oh look, I can walk through this door, I can walk around this corridor. With Silent Hill, it always just felt like the camera was always against you. You weren't even sure which way
Yeah,
you were turning. You got really discombobulated in terms
and the
of even
fog,
just knowing which direction to run. It just really messed with
and
your
the
mind.
map
And it's
was
one of
full
those
of
things
dead-end
now.
streets,
Yes, yeah, and it wasn't always easy to tell because in the map, it was like a map of the town before the earthquake or
like a
whatever
real map,
happened.
like an
So
actual Google Maps, but
like
like a
like an
fucking
actual
earthquake
map.
or a disaster's happened and everything's blocked off.
Yeah, just totally messing with your mind. And it's one of those games where I think I completed it twice. Both times seemed to give me a completely different ending that didn't match up
Yeah,
with what I'd
there's like
done the
5
previous year.
endings, I think.
So and then I wasn't willing to kind of put myself through it again to kind of go through this, because it wasn't like Resident Evil where you felt like each time you went back to the game that
Yeah.
you were better equipped and you knew what you're doing. Like both times when I
No, you were
played through
still
Silent
helpless.
Hill, you were still helpless. Exactly. So in the years that followed, I kind of went back and just watched other people play through it
Mhm.
and got, like you mentioned, I got to see all the different
Yeah.
endings, and I'm
I
still
did play
a
all
bit
the endings
confused.
because you could get half, three-quarters of the way through, and you could play from this save file to the end, go back to that save file, and then get the alternate end, as long as you got the key item or whatever modifier it was that gave the other ending.
And I played the sequels briefly here and there, but I just never got into them in the
Yeah.
same way I got
I
into
played a
this
fair
game.
amount
It just
number
never
2
hit me the same way.
and
And
3.
number two
Like
is very
2
popular.
and 3 are both great. The following ones, not so good.
It happens. It happens. And look, it's just another one. It's like the Metal Gear that we mentioned earlier on. It was Konami just put out another groundbreaking game,
Yeah,
and I think
amazing game.
it caught everybody off guard because, like, I think a lot of people were like myself. It's just like, it's just going to be a Resident Evil clone.
Yeah, it's
That's
been
all it's
another
going to be.
game, like, no, it's gonna mess you up and give you nightmares for weeks.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Speaking of which,
These critters.
so the original game had a infamous demo that came out with, like, PlayStation Magazine and such, and you could play, about 10 minutes of a game that was right in the middle of a scenario. Uh, for people who never played the game, you start off in the kind of this small middle town in America, and it's kind of foggy, like it's winter time or snowing. But then you hear these clanging noise, like your fucking Jason type noises and Friday the 13th. And all of a sudden, it changes from daylight to pitch black dark, which only happens in the real world when there's like some major fires or a nuclear bomb goes off. And I've experienced the fire scenario one where it goes to pitch black in the middle of the day, where ash just covers the entire skyline and it's freaky as hell. And that's what happens in this game. But you have no context of why it's happening. And then you're walking along what's an ordinary street in suburban America. There's like, I don't know, like a bloody malt hamburger shop and concrete. All the walls turn into like mesh, like a Hell in the Cell Undertaker Kane kind of mesh. And all the regular ground goes away. And then when the concrete turns into mesh, you got all these sounds going off. It's into this pitch black. And then weird monsters come mumbling and stumbling out of the dark at you. And they're not like Resident Evil where they charge up to you like a dog or a zombie. They're like falling over themselves, like their legs are broken or something, and they've got knives in their hands. And as they fall over, they're stabbing you in the dark as all kinds of crazy noises and shit go off. And this was so intense that in the original demo version of the game, these weird mutant monsters, which are the graphic on the left, had these little knife slash prison style shiv in their hand. They were child size, like on purpose, like children, and they're falling into and stabbing you. And that actually got changed in some versions of the game to the graphic on the right that has big Wolverine style claws and no head and a big orifice, which isn't really any less scary, but it was a kind of censorship they changed for certain versions of the game. And in the official version of the game, which you don't know when you're playing it, you just know it's scary as fuck, is that you, as you're traveling from a regular street suburban America into these weird metal clanging, baggy, industrial 9-inch nails horror. You're going into another dimension, but it's very much a commentary on mental illness and internal subjective states as much as it is a horror game. So all these things that are happening are like symbolic of other events and stuff that are going on with other characters in the game. But you don't know that at the time. All you know is this is extremely fucked up. This is some Clive Barker Hellraiser level of shit, and you're in the middle of it. And the only way you succeed in this demo and in the first level is to die painfully. That's what you actually have to do, is die at the start of the game to actually progress anywhere. So it really messes with your video game conventions. You're not Mario, you're not Sonic, you're not Hayashi and Tekken. You can't beat the guy when you have to die getting stabbed to death horribly by weird things that are metaphors for school children that tease the character you won't meet until about 10 hours later into the game. It's extremely demented.
It's
And I
it's
love it.
hardcore. Yeah, so do
It's
I.
totally
And
hardcore.
and I remember I played that demo with the grey children, and
Yes.
I'm pretty sure in the magazine it might have actually used the term walking abortions to describe them. So yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. I
childlike
got these terms today
creatures.
online. Otherwise, I don't know them. But I just know the visuals of what I played in the game back then.
The visual was terrifying because, like you said, they don't attack you more so as they fall on you and
Yeah, they
flail.
literally
So like
fall
like a
over. Like
flailing
if you watch
arm with
the
a knife.
if you've ever seen Ric Flair do a full face plant onto his face, but he's got a knife in his hand and he slashes you on the way down. That's basically what they do. And in the actual game, later on, you're in a schoolhouse from like the 1950s, all these old desks and graffitis on the desks and stuff, and you encounter more of these. You know they're definitely meant to be school children.
Yeah, it's messed up, and I think you definitely hit the nail on the head when they must have taken a lot of inspiration from Hellraiser for the visuals because it's around that moment, isn't it, when you first run into them that you actually see like a body that's chained up, the skin's
Yeah, it's
all
it's on the
pulled
right side
apart,
of the
like it.
screen there. It's just so
Yeah,
blurry, it's hard to see. There's this bit, it's pretty much in a crucifix style. There's like a corpse that's ripped open with guts and entrails everywhere, but it's very foggy and low res. Plus, you got all the dark. But when you play the actual game, you can see that it's something really messed up. And you walk into it, the camera spins around you, not unlike the Matrix with Neo in that 360. It spins around and it goes and then out of nowhere, these like little orphan kid things with knives come up to you and fall on you and face plant and stab you. And that's where it ends and fades to black. And then you wake up in the diner like it's a nightmare scenario. And that's when you realize you're traveling between two different worlds, like the everyday world and the kind of dream world, which is an alternate dimension that's a nightmare.
yeah, and it messes with your mind because as a gamer as well, it goes against all your instincts because when you play that the
Yes.
first time, you just keep trying to get away
You're
or to
trying to
fight,
win.
just trying to win. It's and
Where's my
then
rocket launcher?
Exactly, exactly. Or I must be able to like climb up on something to escape. Like you just
Yeah.
can't get it into your head that no,
Mhm.
in order to progress, you're going to have to let these little bastards stab you. You know. So
Yep.
yeah,
It's
what a
very
game.
disturbing and just an amazing game that's like, I don't know, it's so progressive in terms of game design, the audio, the characters, the storyline, all the symbology that's in it that's not evident till you've played the game or even years later playing the sequels or reading articles about the series about how much is actually layered into it. It gets fairly deep. And but the second game was decent. Good sequel, fantastic game, good themes, but the graphics are very clear and a similar engine to Metal Gear 2. It's almost like too clear. The first game, the fog of war works against you, where the graphical limitations were a strength of this game, where you couldn't see what was in the distance, like playing bloody South Park 64. And that worked because when it's nighttime, you can't see very far. And when it's a nightmare, you can't see the edges of things or know what's going on. You're just in a panic state. So it really works for it. Whereas the number two, if I can see the distance and there's the monster, I can kind of sidestep a little better because I can see him coming before he gets there. So the story was fantastic in it, but the graphical upgrades were kind of a downgrade in terms of what subjectively the character would be experiencing, you as the avatar or gamer experiencing. The third game kind of made it more muddier and low res again, and more Quake and more Nine Inch Nails, and a bit more claustrophobic again. But it was just repeating what they did in this first game, which is still the best in the series. And don't play the game on Nintendo Wii because that game was absolute garbage. Terrible cover version of this game, and that was awful.
Yeah, it's not going on my list.
No, yeah, they've done a whole lot of sequels to this, which have just basically trashed the series, and they tried to go more Resident Evil, more action, but none of them had the depth, the resonance, the scenario, the symbology that the first game had, or even just the best of the soundtrack and the sound effects. The sequels kind of ruined the series and pretty much killed it. So the first two games are pretty much the best. The third one's worth a look. Everything after that's just forgettable.
Yeah, I guess it was in a way an accidental hit, and then they couldn't quite
Yes,
work out what
I
it
think
was that
so.
made it successful.
It was really like I don't want to get all fucking film snob wanky here because we're going to wind up in a minute. Um, but Metal Gear and Silent Hill were both really auteur sort of projects that were very much a vision of their creator that was translated very faithfully into limited technology that turned out quite. They could have just easily been films, but if they had been films, they would have been garbage and not good. As games, they're interactive and they unpack slowly and you get all the depth and layers to them. As a film, they probably would have been just a run of the mill Friday or Nightmare on Elm Street or something like that.
I hear you.
But yeah, that brings us to the end of our picks, which have been kick ass awesome picks. And if you don't agree, well, tell us your own in the comments. What do you enjoy?
Yeah. And as we probably mentioned, like we could probably easily pick another handful of games that were
Yeah,
just as
10 fighting
iconic
games,
and
10 RPGs, 10
meaningful.
platform games.
Yeah, but it really is. It's that kind of special place in your youth that the first
Mhm.
PlayStation occupies, and it's a
Awful night
time
on
in
the
my life
weekend.
like I can't imagine ever being able to dedicate as much time to gaming again, like as an adult.
No,
Like even
I can,
don't get me wrong, like I still do play games here and there, but like when you think about all the hours you put into your Sony PlayStation, your original
yeah,
PlayStation,
a lot of
like
hours.
they make bigger and longer games now, but you don't have time to play them.
But not as enjoyable. A lot of them are fluff. I played that Assassin's Creed Valhalla for 160 hours, but that was over 13 months. And I didn't play anything else in that time. A lot of it was fucking fluff. Most of what you see is in the first 10, 20 hours. The rest of it's just rinse and repeat what was in there.
Yeah, I think the formula these days is put in a lot of side
Bloat.
quests to distract you from
Yeah.
just getting to the end of the game.
I like those kind of games. Like I've played all the Assassin's Creed main console games. I played all the Grand Theft Auto games. I actually like big bloated games with lots of side quests or even action RPGs with side quests. I love my side quests. I'll spend 100 hours doing fucking side quests and go back to the main story. But unfortunately, too many modern games have tried to copy the best of the genre poorly doing those things, and they've become these bloated messes that take 5 to 7 years to build the damn things, too expensive, and it's a waste of your life playing half of them. But but I do happen to like certain ones in that genre. But all the Fallout's great games, but I haven't played the last two or three they've made because I just went, well, it's the same shit they did in Fallout 3 all over again. I don't need to repeat that.
I think as well when you know already ahead of time how much time it's going to take you to really
Yeah,
invest in
I
the
could
game, because
complete
sometimes it can
20
kind of
Super
put you off.
Nintendo games.
Yeah, just stick in like a Sega Mega Drive game and blast away at it for half
Yeah,
an hour and you're done.
play Golden Axe. You're done in 20 minutes.
Yeah,
Play it again.
play it again, listen to that music again. I love it.
Yeah, Streets of Rage
We
2, Streets of Rage 3. You could complete all three Streets of Rages in less time than any modern game. You could play, like an hour or two each at best.
will have to someday in the future, Johnny, do our favorite
Yeah,
Sega Mega Drive entries as
yeah.
well.
I reckon follow ups. I was thinking earlier today before we finish up, like there's two like favorite Mega Drive slash Genesis games, as in like good games. Another one would be fun is we could do best and worst of like licensed 16-bit games, like like your Angry Nerd style. Like what are the best and worst ones, like your Hook or RoboCop and Terminator and that sort of thing.
Michael Jackson's Moonwalker.
Oh, that was decent. I like the arcade of that. Really kicks ass. Three players, man. Turns into a
Oh
robot, does
yeah,
the dance,
yeah.
and woo!
Oh, when it comes to the license games, you'll get the tippy top and the lowest of lows. You just don't
Yeah.
know what you're going to get.
Yeah, I mean, most of them are garbage, but then there's that 10% that are actually good and worth playing, like the Terminator arcade shooting with the big light gun and the aliens one in the head and some fun stuff. Well, we'll finish up there.
Well, I had a great time, Johnny, and yeah, like you were saying, if you
Yeah,
disagree with our picks or if you have your own completely
I
different
disagree with all
picks,
of your picks. That's why two
yeah,
of yours. Nobody's going to notice this, but Mark had more games on this list than I had in mine. One, because I cranked this out in a few hours and I have time to put more in. But two of Mark's picks are mine, which is Silent Hill and Resident Evil 2. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to fucking repeat them, am I? The
yeah, no,
important
it
thing
had to
is,
be
did
done.
Mark get his demo discs? Go back to the thumbnail and see if you can count how many demo discs are in that thumbnail because they're in there.
Yeah, we won't tell you. You have to go and search for those Easter eggs yourselves, folks.
They're in there.
You, just
Here's
like
a
a lot of
clue.
these great games, just like a lot of these great games we discussed, you
Yeah,
have to put the time
Easter
in now
eggs.
to get the most out of
Yeah,
it. But
yeah. We've had,
no, like I said, let us know what your favorite games are for
yep.
this era, for
Or
this
cheats. What
console,
were your
because we'd be
favorite
curious.
cheats?
Yeah, and if you know any real life cheats that we can use to just make our days and lives easier, let us know what the codes
Go to the
are.
shop, buy some toys, come home, sell them for twice the price. That's a cheat some people can do, but I've never done it
Yeah,
once. It's never worked out for me.
that's the double your money cheat.
Yeah, double your money cheat. I just keep pressing X and hope something happens. Well,
Yeah,
thanks, Mark,
I
for your
can't.
awesome picks.
And thanks for
And
having
I'll
me,
say
Johnny. Great time.
yeah, I'll say goodbye to the audience, and you can say your goodbye.
Game over, folks.
Game over, man.
See what I did there?
check check those corners.
See you later, guys.
See ya.